All right, Hard Yarners. What is that? That's about a 3.5 hour absolute fucking epic.
Put it in.
Yeah, it's our longest episode, but felt like it flew by. We were joined by Dr. Anthony Chaffee. I always want to say Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Yeah.
Fuck that guy.
They look very different.
So, it was an incredible episode. But before we get into what we spoke about, firstly, I just want to thank our sponsors, Raunchy Brewing Co. Thank you very much.
It's actually good.
It's actually good. It's the beer that tastes good, even though we don't want to encourage the beer drinking. It's a great tasting lager. It's got a few different things. I think it's got a pale ale and a Sir Henry's stout is a couple of the other ones, and the stout is good if you like Guinness. I like it. It was actually better. So I know that's sacrilege to say for any stout drinkers, but I loved it. That's great. And as you can see behind Dr. Chaffee, we have alltradescover.com.au. They all things tradie insurance. So especially if you're a small business, when it comes to tradie, they're pretty good, and they focus specifically on the little guy. So covering you for all your issues on site.
About time someone looked after the little guy.
Fucking oath. But to the episode, yes, we were joined by Anthony Chaffee, neurosurgeon, Dr. Carnivore. What do we talk about? Because we had a lot of controversy in the last episode, but it was very well received as well. So
good.
Do you remember what we talked about?
A lot of stuff. We talked about, we touched on some of the meat things, about, the benefits of that, address some of the questions and concerns that people had from the last episode. Well, what about this and what about that?
Yep.
Answered some Patreon questions, but also did a bit of a deep dive into, why is it that we didn't know this? Why didn't we know that meat was good for us? Why do we think that all these other things were good for us? And actually went down to the pretty nefarious origins of nutritional science and its ties with religious organizations, as well as with the food industry, and actually the processed food industry being founded by religious enterprises in order to get people away from eating meat, which is a bit awful. And so there's a lot of facts and data there, and just historical record that almost no one knows about. That's quite frightening, and these people are well in control. They have a lot of power and a lot of money, and they are manipulating everyone to buy their product and not live a healthier life. And so we did a deep dive into that.
It was an incredible episode. I said at the end of the episode, it was eye-opening. There was a couple of things there, especially with the religious ties and the original sort of studies being funded by certain people. So very, very eye-opening episode. Definitely worth a listen. And I'm going to go back and listen to this a couple of times, because there's a couple of words where I went, I don't understand what you're saying. But that was very good episode, and I think the listeners are going to enjoy this one.
Fuck yeah.
Hope so.
Fuck yeah. Let's get hard.
Let's get hard.
Welcome to Hard Yarns Podcast.
I am fucking fat.
Anything Chris White says, please disregard it.
5D is actually a state of being. It's a unity consciousness.
That was Hard Yarns with me, Frankie Rose. So I'm going to throw it over to your co-host,
Daniel Delby.
And Cameron Brand.
I would do this and then I'd gong.
Free in attendance for the millions listening at home. Let's get hard.
But, I mean, with that, the whole thing that got them in the shit was a plant.
That's
eating
it.
the apple.
Yeah, that's
if
it.
they'd eaten the fucking snake, they'd have been fine.
I think it would have been much better.
Yes.
Well, and then you go, the next story down is Cain and Abel.
Yep.
Right? And, Cain is a farmer and grows crops and, offered up a bunch of his crops to God. God wasn't really digging it. You don't make friends with salad. And Abel, was a herder, gave a bunch of meat as a sacrifice, and God was pleased. They don't say exactly why. They just said meat was good, plants are bad. And then Cain got pissed, killed Abel, and that was the first angry vegan hitting the streets.
It's biblical.
Yeah, it's that.
I'd only just read that story a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, yeah?
And like you said, they don't give any reason, and that's part of it is God's like, I just liked the other guy.
Yeah, it's
like he gave me food, I like that more.
Yeah. Was he giving me lawn clippings? Like, what the hell is
Yeah.
this? It's like I'm not the trash man. You know?
Fuck yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah.
Fuck, it's been a hectic few, 6 months since, I think maybe a bit longer since you've been on. And I mean, our clips have been featured on 60 Minutes. You've been on 60 Minutes. Had a shitstorm of some people trying to discredit the episode. And first ever article written on the Hard Yarns, which is a fact check article on one we had with you. But
that was ridiculous too.
it was silly. But mate, it is great to have you back. You are polarizing for a lot of people, but at the same time, you're great message for health and stuff. So yeah, what's been going on? Because that 60 Minutes thing was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate them just putting me on at all. I thought that was really great, and just getting that message out there. And, it's going to reach a lot of people that, it wouldn't have otherwise. And at least opens the door to them going like, okay, there's this other thing out there. And yes, they positioned me in with a lot of other people that they were trashing. And so they were sort of trashing me by proxy, so they were saying that these people are just, trying to push a product and it's basically a fake health product, invent a problem and just conveniently have a solution, which I think is what, the Game Changers did with James Cameron. They said, oh, you can't eat meat, but you need protein. I just happen to own $140 million worth of pea protein company. So,
Well, and so what I was going to ask in that situation was, do you before we go into it, do you have any business, I guess, benefits? Do you have any financial benefit from pushing this sort of lifestyle? Is there anything you've invested in for people to be able to go, hey, he's got $150 million pea protein?
No, I don't have any products. I don't sell any supplements. I've had people approach me to get on board with that sort of thing. And I don't think you need supplements if you're eating a proper diet. With the caveat that if people aren't eating a proper diet, you probably do need to eat something more nutritious. And I just say, well, just eat some liver. That's very nutrient dense. Some people say, I don't want to eat liver, and they go down the liver supplement pathway. So that's like this 3-step away, sort of like I could see, some people benefiting that sometime, but really what I'm trying to say is just eat a normal diet. No, I don't have any sort of investments. I don't have a product. The only thing I've invested in this space would be Rivero Health, which is Sean Baker's company. And his business model is to just get people healthy, going to different companies and basically saying, hey, we can lower your insurance premiums by X million dollars a year by getting people on this sort of eating plan, which is something that a lot of companies have done. Nike's been doing this since I heard about it in the 90s when I was a kid. They had incentives to be healthier, where if you ran into work, or if you biked into work, you'd get X amount of dollars more per week. If you ran into work, you get double that. Yeah. If you spent an hour in the gym during the day, you would get an extra hour for lunch. Like you could have your lunch hour and then you can get a second hour to go work out. And so they had these incentives because it lowered their costs, it lowered their insurance premiums, lowered their expenditures, and increased productivity. And so from what I understand, Rivero's trying to do a similar thing and trying to go directly to larger corporations and say, hey, we can save you millions of dollars, implementing these sorts of things. So that's something that I think is a good thing to do, just trying to get people healthy.
That'd be interesting to see big insurance going against what big food, big pharma, who are probably very well connected, I guess, in that aspect. They're both very powerful industries. Big meat, all these sorts of, and when I say big, I mean the big mainstream businesses. The big pharma, big food, they have a benefit in you not eating the best food and being constantly sick and masking symptoms with medications and over prescriptions. And that's what I think that's a great way to start, is the push for over prescriptions by doctors and the medical industry, you being a doctor yourself. How do you see that sort of changing moving forward? Because at the moment, I'm just seeing a lot of people waking up to the idea that they can address the root cause instead of just masking it. But it's still it's a small minority are waking up to that. So
yeah, and I mean, and that's really my main reason for doing the podcast and YouTube channel and doing interviews like this, because I think it's very important. And I don't think it's going to come from the top down. I don't think these guys are going to happily give up, the multi-trillion-dollar profits that they're getting in the food and drug side of things. And so it has to come from the grassroots. We have to get critical mass of people understanding, so that more and more people see, like, oh, hey, look at all these people that are benefiting. They're doing better. They're getting healthier. And at least understand. I mean, we have the concept of you eat the wrong thing, you'll get sick. We were told that with cholesterol and saturated fat and meat. And so we reduced significantly the amount of red meat and cholesterol and saturated fat we were eating, dramatically increased the amount of unsaturated fats and seed oils and high fructose corn syrup, because everything tastes like garbage when you take out meat and fat. And we've gotten more and more and more sick. So people understand the concept of things that you can eat can damage you. It's just that we've gotten it the wrong way around. And so, yes, people in the medical establishment, by and large, are, they're just sort of frontline workers, and they're just sort of being told from the generals, hey, this is how you treat this is how you address that. And a lot of that information is unfortunately coming from the drug companies, because, and the reps, they're all nice people. It's not that they're trying to mislead people or anything like that. It's just like, hey, this is our product. These are all the good things about it. They're getting all that stuff from their company as well. And they say, hey, look at all these great things. We have this study that shows X, Y, and Z. And so that's where you get your information from and your education from as a doctor on what the new drugs are. And you sort of get an idea, okay, well, this is a new thing and this is a new tool in the arsenal. And that system is very backwards, right? You're getting the people sort of pushing their product are also the ones educating you on on practice, on best practice. What
I was going to say, surely in an industry where a big pharma is the ones also funding the research.
Yes,
they're funding research that they're trying to profit from, which is a huge conflict of interest. Surely there should be some laws against this.
Doing a study is one thing, right? But then when it goes through FDA approval, that's the other thing. So FDA needs to do their own studies and look at this and all these sorts of things. The problem therein, now it makes a bit of sense, you say, okay, you want to push this drug through, we need to do these trials, you're going to have to fund them, or at least partially fund them, right? So I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's around like 70% of the FDA's budget comes from big pharma paying for their product to go through. Now, normally you'd think of that, I would think of that as like, this is a penalty, you got to pay to play, all these sorts of things. But their thing is like, well, this is all our funding. We need this funding, so we need it. No, like they need you.
Yeah.
But at the moment, they're very beholden to the pharmaceutical companies. So, you don't know if maybe things are getting through that maybe shouldn't, like, with Vioxx, that was a big drug that went through.
Explain that.
That was a COX-2 inhibitor that was selective for the inflammation pathway that you get, like with aspirin or naproxen or something like that. But aspirin and naproxen, they're COX-1 and COX-2 inhibitors, so that's just different chemicals, prostaglandins in your body that can either cause inflammation or protect the lining of your stomach, right? So you take aspirin, you can damage the lining of your stomach, and the acids can sort of eat away at that, and you can get ulcers, if you keep taking this stuff for too long. And so this was a selective COX-1 inhibitor that just gave the pain relief but didn't damage your stomach. And so that's a great idea. We still have some of these things out there. Yeah. Celebrex, that's one of these things. And so this was sort of pushed through, and a couple sort of little warning flags didn't get looked at closely enough. And it, the long and short of it was that this increased slightly people's risk of heart attack.
Yeah, okay.
It went from 1% risk with like aspirin and things like that to like a 2% risk. So I was like, okay, well, it's not that much. But when you're talking about hundreds of millions of people doing this, it was something like 50 or 60,000 people died. Extra people died just from a painkiller, right? I mean, it's just like, come on, And so I was just looking at this the other day actually, and so I think that I forget the company, but whoever it was, they got something like $12 billion in sales out of this, and they had to sell, and they had to sort of settle and give off like $5 billion in a lawsuit settlement because there was some pretty shady stuff going on with how they pushed it through. And so, you know, what does that tell you? That means that you're allowed to kill 60,000 people and still make $7 billion.
Yeah.
You know, that has to go.
Yes.
Yes.
Clearly. And, you know, your point earlier about big food and big pharma sort of being in bed together. Now, from what I understand, they're both heavily invested in each other. And so that should raise some warning flags.
Yeah.
But something I found out the other day, speaking with Dr. Gary Fettke, a very interesting guy down in Tasmania, as an orthopedic surgeon. He came under attack because he was giving nutrition advice to he's an orthopedic surgeon, so he was doing a lot of foot amputations for diabetic patients, and toes and feet and legs and knees, and you're just going all the way up and just like getting worse and worse and worse. And he was showing them, he's like, hey, look, there's research and there's evidence and there's data showing that if you just stop eating carbs, you go on this ketogenic diet, start eating clean food, don't eat processed food, you may not need to get your foot amputated. And he actually had a number of patients who didn't end up needing amputation, and helped a lot of other, you know, joint issues. You know, Dr. Baker in America, same thing. He was putting people on, you know, using diet to change, you know, their outcomes. And so instead of needing joint replacement, he did a lot of joint replacements. And as a result, a lot of these people didn't need joint replacements. And Fettke as well. He just said, hey, okay, we'll set you up. We'll sign you up for surgery, for his joint replacement. But I need you to be on this diet going into this. Yep. Right. And so they do it. And he said that a lot of times when people were able to do that, they'd call him up before and go, hey, I don't think I need surgery anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is what you're supposed to do as a doctor.
Yeah.
You're supposed to help people.
How was this considered a controversial thing? Like, you know, making it a positive impact? Like,
well, when you're messing with people's, you know, bottom lines, you know, and you have these vested interests. So that was the thing. Dr. Fettke came under attack from the nutritional establishment. They're like, you're not allowed to give nutrition advice. You're not a nutritionist. How dare you, sir?
Yeah.
And he's like, it's my patient.
Yeah.
I can absolutely give them nutritional advice. That's literally my job. And I'm stopping them from needing surgeries, which are now unnecessary, which you would think in a public system would be a really good thing that people would be very positive about, because you're saving millions of dollars to the public system. But, you know, there's people pulling strings. And so he had a lot of people like one of the heads of the hospital and things like that were personally coming after him as well. Had this like one of the national, you know, the head guys in nutritional body or whatever in Australia was coming after him as well. And they're like, what the hell is going on? Like what? And his wife was looking at this going like, this is weird. This is like a concerted effort. This is way too much of a big deal, you know, than it should be. She started digging into it. She found all these extremely sketchy ties from the nutritional sciences and the nutritional colleges, and even the people that founded the nutritional sciences and write their curriculum and their textbooks is all wrapped up in big food, but also, crazy enough, as we mentioned sort of off air, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who in the 1800s had one of their prophetesses, Ellen G. White, had a vision from God that said everyone needs to stop eating meat, because meat causes lustful feelings. It makes people, you know, more vigorous and, you know, want to have sex, and that's a sin. Lust is a sin, and so you need to stop eating that, and you need to eat these, you know, plant things and processed grains and really bland food. That was specific. They want bland food to suppress your lustful feelings. Basically, what this is doing is making you unhealthy, not giving you proper nutrition, suppressing your hormones, so that your body's saying you're not safe to have a kid. You know, you're barely taking care of yourself. You're not going to be able to bring in another kid. And so, you know, it suppresses your sex drive. And they thought this was a good thing, because obviously, you know, this is like Victorian era. So this is all about, you know, temperance, and lust was a sin, 7 deadly sins. So this got pushed through, and her protege was a guy named John Harvey Kellogg, who then grew up to be Dr. Kellogg, and founded Kellogg cereals, because he was so, you know, ingrained in this. His father was a member of the church, and he was like her typesetter. So like from 12 years old, he's reading these books about how, like, if a child masturbates even once, it's like putting a gun to his breast and pulling the trigger. His life is over in that instant. And so he really took that to heart. And so he would prescribe a vegan diet to people, vegan vegetarian diet. He would also circumcise young boys and even girls without anesthetic to deter them from masturbating again. And he would even use like acids and other sort of caustic agents to score and scar the clitoris of young girls. And I mean, truly sick things if you look back on it. And he thought that he was just doing God's work. And so he was also the one who convinced the medical establishment in America that it was in the best interest of a child's health and a man's health to circumcise your kid. So, but it was to suppress masturbation. That was his aim. And he tried to push this forward with girls as well, to try to, cut off the clitoris and labia of girls. Wow. And that one thing, thank God, didn't go through. Yeah. But this is why most men in America are circumcised. Wow. Is because of that. Because of Harvey Kellogg. And, he was pushing this for a masturbation side of things. Yeah. But the idea that this is beneficial from a health standpoint remained even after people figured out lube and kept jacking off,
Yeah. And what's the... cornflakes. Can't confirm. What's cornflakes... wasn't that originally designed as a meal to suppress that sort of stuff as well? I think we touched on this in the last episode.
You're just scoffing cornflakes instead of jacking off.
Yeah. But it lowers testosterone levels or something along. Well, I can't remember. You touched on it potentially last time.
I mean, look, it does. I mean, eating processed foods and a lot of carbs and things like that can absolutely disrupt your hormones, and you're just not eating what you're supposed to eat and getting enough fat and cholesterol and these sorts of things. Your testosterone is made out of cholesterol. Estrogen is made out of cholesterol. Cortisol is made out of cholesterol. DHEA, androstenedione, progesterone, progestogens, all these sorts of things, they're all made out of cholesterol. And so you don't get enough. You make a lot of this, but you don't necessarily make as much as you want. And this is the funny thing about cholesterol, is that people say, oh yeah, you don't want to have dietary cholesterol. All the medical bodies and things like that are pretty much agreed now that dietary cholesterol really doesn't have too much of an effect on your body, because your body makes a lot of these things, and your body only accepts in the amount of cholesterol that it has a deficiency for. So, you eat a whole bunch of, fat cholesterol from egg yolks and steak and things like that. You'll absorb a very small amount, as much as your body says, this is how much we need. And it's very particular about that. So, you can suppress your hormones in many different ways, and there are hormone disruptors in plants as well that actually are proestrogenic and can disrupt your own hormones. Because
that like soy?
Soy is a very good example of that. Yeah. So soy, from an article I was looking at, it has over 1 million nanograms of phytoestrogens, which may not act perfectly exactly like estrogen, but it's definitely going to disrupt your hormones. A fertile woman would make between 150,000 and 180,000 nanograms of estrogen, right? So it's like 10 times more or so grams of phytoestrogens in soy. Birth control pills, 35,000 nanograms. So, you're talking like 20 plus times more estrogen than the birth control pill and 3 ounces of soy, right? And then they say, well, but meat, they're given all these hormones. And I've actually spoken to patients that said that, or people, they weren't my patient, but they were patients of someone else, who said that their oncologist said, you can't eat red meat because of all the hormones that are put in it. Right? Okay, well, this is someone who hasn't done their research, right? Because, there's normally 2 nanograms per 3 ounces of lean beef, 2 nanograms of estrogen, right? Hormone-treated beef has 3.9 nanograms, right? So it's double. So like, oh my gosh, twice as much. My God. Put it in context, right? So it's 35,000 in birth control pill. Okay, and what is the alternative? Yeah. Well, maybe soy. Right, and you're gonna have way worse. I mean, cabbage has 400 nanograms of estrogen in it, right? So the beef is really not just making it's just really not making the radar.
Do you still try and look for stuff that isn't hormone traded, or you're not as worried? Like grass fed, grain fed. Does it? Yeah, well, look, it does make a difference. I don't think it makes too much of a difference on a hormone side of things, because even males are going to make way more estrogen than that, but. When it is true that grass-fed and finished, cow, regeneratively raised, rotating, pastures and things like that, they routinely will have, depending on different ranchers that I've spoken to, 4 to 5 times the amount of micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals and things like that, which is great, right?
And the eggs. There was one guy I saw him giving a talk at a university in America, just online, and he was saying that he regeneratively raises and pasture raises animals. And you can say something that says pasture raised chickens or whatever, but they just put them in a pasture and then feed them corn and soy. Right? It's not really the same. They're technically in a pasture, but they're not actually eating bugs and worms and lizards and things like that they're supposed to.
Yep.
But he was doing this right. And he said that the amount of folate that's in a normal egg in America, chicken egg, had about 41 milligrams of folate. And he said that his eggs had over 1,000, right? So it's a massive increase, right? So there is a difference. It is better, but I don't think the hormones really stack up, because you're talking going from 2 to 3.9. Yeah, and there's 35,000 in the birth control pill. We make over, well over 100,000. So, that 1.9 increased nanogram, I don't see it as too much of an issue. People think for some reason that we give these hormones and then slaughter them right then, right? Of course not, right? It's going at the beginning of the life cycle so that they grow bigger, right? It's a waste of money if you give it, if it's still in their system, right? Same with antibiotics. And there are, from what I understand, from what I was speaking to someone about, that meat in America gets tested, and if they find any trace of antibiotics, it's just like, no, this doesn't get to go to the shelf. Yeah, that's what I understand. I haven't looked into that too closely, but that was what I was speaking to someone who was in the industry that they were saying. So, a lot of this stuff is, just like cholesterol, just like fat, is sort of like a boogeyman to try to scare people away from eating meat and eating these processed food garbage products. And and to your point earlier about big pharma making a lot of these studies, and they do, and you're not going to really see too many negative studies come out from any industry, right? Because they pay for the studies so they can design them the way they want to. And so it could be in such a way that things come out. Like there's a study with rats that said, when you give them Coca-Cola with cane sugar, they lose weight and they do better than all these other things. And we gave them, Coca-Cola. And it's like, guess who was funding that one?
Wasn't Pepsi.
Exactly. And so, the studies that they put out, are the ones that pass muster, right? So they're maybe they're perfectly legit.
Yep.
And it's just a brilliant product. Could be. But they could design these things in such a way that it's going to look like that anyway. And if it didn't come out very well, they just don't publish it.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's their purview.
It's a cherry picking.
Yeah. Well, and food does that as well. Now, first of all, the vast majority of nutritional studies and research that are published are put out by the food industries and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who are heavily involved in the food industries, right? So you had Kellogg's.
That's insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like no one's picking that if you're not in the know.
No, that's right. Yeah.
Well, this is all came out. Belinda Fettke found a lot of this stuff out, and Dr. Robert Lustig in America is a professor at UCSF, or professor emeritus at UCSF, who's a pediatric neuroendocrinologist. Sort of broke the case open on how toxic fructose is, and he wrote a book called Metabolical, and he goes into that as well, actually showing a lot of these connections as well. So these are facts. And I've spoken to a lot of people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, that's all true." And so that's the thing. So just Coca-Cola, they spend 11 times the amount of money per year on nutritional research than the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. So that's just Coca-Cola. So that's not Pepsi and Nestle and Kellogg's and all the rest of them. And the Seventh-day Adventists put out a lot too. So we have Sanitarium Foods here in Australia.
Yep.
One of the largest, cereal producers and food producers.
Yeah.
They're owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They were founded by Ellen G. White in like the early 1900s. I believe it was Ellen G. White, but that was as part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and so they were tax exempt.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so that money goes into funding their research and their programs and putting people in positions of power, like various professors and things like that. Like I believe like Walter Willett, Professor Willett at Harvard is a Seventh-day Adventist. He's the main nutritional researcher at Harvard, and this is why Harvard. You go to Harvard, you get a master's in public health. I debated a lady who had done that. She was from Australia. She did a master's at Harvard. And she went in thinking one thing. She came out a vegan. It's vegan, all great. Well, this is because this is what they're sort of pitching there, and is from the Seventh-day Adventist Church through their proxies.
Do you think it's like a a nefarious push by the Adventist church, as in like trying to lower testosterone and lustful behavior? Do you think that's specifically what's driving that, or do you think it's just a scary coincidence?
Well, it certainly was originally.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, I mean, they write about it. Like you need to eat plants. You have to stop eating meat in order to suppress these lustful urges. Now, they may not have realized that this was suppressing testosterone and actually making you less healthy.
Okay.
Right. I have no idea if they thought that. I don't think they did. I mean, from the sounds of it, they were quite sincere in their beliefs that this was a good thing to do. But you know, Kellogg was like a zealot. I mean, he was really, really hardcore about this sort of stuff. And so, you know, I don't necessarily think that he was trying to hurt people. I think that he just really bought into this. You know,
he
just
wanted you to stop jerking off.
Yeah, that's it. It's just well, because you know, there's this book that he was reading as a 12-year-old. His dad saying this is religious, this is a religion, right? So you're supposed to believe this stuff word for word. And she is a prophetess. She was a prophet from God, and her word is, you know, coming through, the word of God coming through her. That's what you think. And when you're a kid and you have no other reason to believe otherwise, you know, that's going to shape you and that's going to really influence you. And so it seems to have done that for him. And so he was just like, this is really important. We need to do this. Now, since then, there's probably just a lot of profit incentives and things like that. But you know, I have no idea. I don't. But the top down, speaking again with people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they say, well, actually, most people do eat some meat, but they definitely say you shouldn't eat meat. That comes from the top down. It was like, hey, you shouldn't eat meat. It's sinful. It causes lust and all these sorts of things. They're still pitching that same story. Yeah. But he said that the one guy I was talking to, he said that there's really only like 5% or so that are really like hardcore vegan zealots. The rest eat less meat and more plants, but you know, they'll still eat some meat. And but he said it's definitely from the top down.
Do you ever consider that for yourself? Like, obviously they're so far invested on that side, but for yourself as a meat advocate, obviously you're looking pretty healthy and all the rest of it. Yeah, but you know, like at some point, if you found that it wasn't working or something, some health thing came in and you realised you needed to change.
Absolutely.
Would you find that difficult?
No.
No.
You know, if I found that there was you know, very hard conclusive evidence that what I was doing is wrong, I would want to change it as soon as possible. Especially because I'm in a position that people are listening to me, and I have no interest in hurting people. Yeah. I do not want people to do something that I think is going to harm them, which is why I'm telling them, don't eat plants. Yeah. You know, I mean, different plants are made differently, but certainly getting away from processed foods and sugar and seed oils and these sorts of things, and eating healthy food, which is meat, eating fatty meat. You want to eat some other things too. I mean, that's fine. You get rid of most of this processed garbage, most of the, you know, Kellogg's trash. Yeah. And you start eating actual food like meat, you know, I mean, having some vegetables and fruit and things like that, you're still going to be doing better than 99% of people out there. And so I'm all for that. I just want people to have the information that, you know, meat's actually good. We've been fed this lie from different industries that profit greatly from our misery. And but if I found, I always keep an open mind. I mean, that's how I came to this, you know, way of thinking, was because I was, you know, being told all these other things. And so, okay. But then I saw like a lot of evidence that like that was wrong, and this is a better way of doing it. And, you know, and the thing is too, is I think it's pretty convincing that, you know, what we've been eating for 2-3 million years predominantly, which has been meat, you know, we've been, you know, apex predators, top of the food chain. Like, I can't think of any apex predator that's vegetarian. I mean, it's a contradiction of terms. An apex predator means that you are eating animals by definition. You're a carnivore, you're a predator. You're eating animals, right? You're not a lettuce predator. Yeah. And so, you know, what we've been eating predominantly for the last few million years is obviously what we're biologically adapted to eat. Now, you have some people that will, I think, quite insanely say that, oh, yeah, well, we've been eating that way for a few million years, but that doesn't mean that it's ideal. These plants that have been bioengineered and have just been, you know, broccoli doesn't exist in nature. We bred that through heavily breeding, brought about broccoli and all the different plants and corn and these sorts of things that we have.
Yeah, you look at it, even a banana. You look at a banana or an apple. You look at the original.
Yeah, it was nothing
they're like tiny apples. If you look
almost
at apples,
no
they're like a
sugar.
fucking almost like just a walnut. It's tiny. So you can clearly see that we've changed them ourselves.
Changed them, and now we have the advent of processed foods, which are highly industrialized, right? So in seed oils, I mean, people should look up on YouTube. Go to YouTube, look up how to make seed oils. It's disgusting. Like you'll never want to put this stuff in your body. They were used as industrial lubricants. That was what they were first used. I know whale oil probably used as well. It's a fat, and it can be used as a lubricant. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad just because it was used for an industrial process. However, it is bad, and it has a lot of things that are very pro-oxidative. When you have that cis bond, that double bond, we just call it an unsaturated fat. So all the different carbons, if they just have one bond, they're saturated with hydrogens and things like that. If you have that cis bond, right, so you have a double bond and then they branch off of that, well, that's unsaturated because not every single bond has hydrogen on it, right? Okay. And so then you have polyunsaturated. You have a couple of those double bonds. They're more rigid. It can't really move as well. You need some of these things, but you also need saturated fats as well. And the important thing is that at that point of that cis bond, that's a point, in people that understand biochemistry and organic chemistry, that's a point of attack for oxidation. So you can get oxidative, you can damage these things, you can bring off free radicals, and you can cause these things to be quite harmful. And so, when you're preparing these things, you're using a lot of heat to prepare the seed oils and things like that. And that will speed up that degradation reaction and oxidation, right? So every 10 degrees Celsius that you raise a reaction, you will double the reaction rate, right? So if you're bringing this up to very high industrial temperatures, you're going to increase the reaction rate by millions of times. So you're going to bring all this stuff to conclusion, right? So you're going to oxidize the hell out of all this stuff, and make it quite toxic. And then they have to use bleach and all these sorts of other really highly toxic chemicals, things that we know cause cancer and cause all these other sorts of diseases. And you have to use that to sort of clean this stuff up a bit. And they try to wash it out. I say, oh, it's not in there. I don't know. They said that about, glyphosate. And you get bread that's 6,000 times the upper limit that's supposed to be in there. Oh, no. It's not that big of a deal. Well, you're the guy selling it to me. I'm not really going to take your word for it. Yeah. And so, these things can be highly toxic. They can cause a lot of stress. They can cause a lot of oxidation, a lot of omega-6s, a lot of linoleic acid. These things are just not good for our body. You're heating these things up. They turn into trans fat. So instead of that cis bond, we have that double bond there, and they chink off on the same side. That's called a cis bond. They can go off on the other side, right? And that's called a trans bond, and that's a trans fatty acid. Now we know that trans fatty acids now are really bad, because trans fats don't exist in nature at all. And so our body and our biology looks at it going, what in God's name is this? We can't use this. It ends up being just deposited in little areas that it shouldn't be. You end up getting heart disease and dying and getting a lot of other problems as well. So they're going away with that. That trans fats are illegal in most countries now. But they used to grill McDonald's fries in trans fats, right? And because they used to do beef tallow, and then in the 80s, that's bad for you. So they say, okay, we'll use these safe and healthy trans fats that were, made by science. I'd rather have it made by nature, honestly. Not nature's still going to kill you. I mean, arsenic's natural, right? But but at least it's not just completely made up. We have no idea what's going on. The problem is trans fats are gone in most countries. But when you cook with vegetable oils, seed oils, and things like that, you can actually make trans fats. Wow. So these cooking oils that people use as a mainstay in cooking, you're actually turning these things into trans fats to some degree. You'll change that bond into trans fats.
At the temperature or?
The cooking temperatures, yeah.
And that's this push towards like fake meat or replacement meat, which is full of seed oils and these sorts of things.
And estrogen too.
Having been a vegetarian for 6 years and dabbling in a few of these things and seeing the massive change in my but like the inflammation in knees, joints, and just my back pain. A lot of things have gone since moving away from specifically the seed oils and replacing it with a largely whole foods diet. And now moving towards, I've tried the carnivore, which we did after your episode. I did it a few months after, but incredible results.
Nice.
Felt incredible. It went. I almost did it for my own curiosity to see if I could rubbish it and come back to you and go, no, I didn't like this part of it. And I found nothing but positives. Now, I only did it for a short amount of time, and I'm going to probably try and do it for a couple of months, get my blood work done prior and post to really look into it. But the biggest change I did notice, regardless of the carnivore or adding the meat, is getting rid of seed oils, specifically packaged foods and the meat replacement. The meat replacement stuff is fucking disgraceful.
It's so bad.
It doesn't, I didn't notice too much of a difference with taste, honestly, because I'd only have it in a fucking Hungry Jack's burger or something terrible for you anyway.
Yeah, that's the sauce.
Yeah, exactly.
You just tasted
yeah,
sauce.
exactly. But I've looked into what was in these sort of meat replacements, and you're essentially eating a fucking seed oil.
Yeah.
You didn't have any negatives
Of the
on carnivore?
The negatives.
I had some.
Okay, so my negatives were obviously my, toilet for a couple of days, adjusting to that. I had some headaches from the carb withdrawals. What else? My mental clarity was incredible. It's just
because you went from pretty much barely any meat to all meat.
So I
that's
slowly
a big
went. Yeah, it's a huge
swing.
jump. So I went from vegetarian, no meat for 6 years. Then at the start of this year, I added meat to my diet slowly, very slowly. Mine was, and listeners have heard enough, a gut issue that I've heard. Meat sort of exacerbated the pain that I was having in my gut lining that was fucked up by prescription drugs. How good, it's full circle. But once I sort of added it slowly, I realised I could handle the meat again. I was able to adjust. I stopped getting the meat sweats, all of these sorts of things. And jumping into carnivore was a big change up. But fuck, it just felt incredible for me. What were your negatives?
Because I was fairly close to carnivore before that.
Yep.
For a bit in, and then the first time I went carnivore, I think it was I'd gone 2 weeks and then did a night shift and played footy where we had to travel, and I cramp up
yes,
a lot normally.
That was my negative.
But this one I got full body cramp on the bus.
Yeah.
That was bad.
Cramp, actually, that's one negative I've felt, but I was told salts.
Yeah, well, I was doing that, but then this time, so I went 2 months doing it, and then played footy. Similar thing, like still cramp because I cramp anyway. But yeah, would you suggest taking magnesium when you first start the carnivore diet, or is it just kind of waiting for your body to adapt?
It depends on the individual. Most people don't need that, but there are some that do. So when your insulin has a role to play in the retention or excretion of your electrolytes at the level of your kidney. And so what I think is going on is that, we're eating a whole bunch of carbs we're not used to, and our insulin's going up and up and up and up and up, and that's causing our kidneys to be like, okay, well, this is deranging this, or our body's compensating for this excess insulin all the time. Now that insulin comes down because we're not pulling in a bunch of carbs and everything like that, that comes back to a normal level. And now this is sort of overcompensating. So you get, you can get like when you're taking blood pressure medication, you have to be careful coming off of blood pressure medication because you can get rebound hypertension, right? So it's sort of a rebound elimination of electrolytes. Some people will get that. Most people adjust pretty quickly. But, if you're having sort of issues or whatever, it's easy enough to take some, electrolyte supplements. I would just not take anything that has like sweeteners or flavorings and things like that, because those are they're not good. But I find most people don't. But if you are drinking coffee, caffeine, tea, things like that, that will actually strip your body of magnesium.
Yeah, right.
And so, and it also dehydrates you. So that's a perfect storm for cramps. And I find that needs to be addressed. If you are still drinking coffee, most people drink coffee. And then most people continue to drink coffee when they go carnivore because they're like, whoa.
That's me as well. I was like, whoa, fuck, we're not going overboard. But yeah.
And so you'll end up sapping yourself with magnesium as well. But normally you'll get enough. Like I've checked my magnesium. It is well and truly in like an optimal range. It's well above what we consider the normal good range. In here in Australia for the reference ranges, because the reference ranges are the average for the community. First 2,000 people that come in and get a blood test, that's the reference range. Yeah, right. But they're elderly people, they're sick people, there are all these other sort of malnourished people. More and more people are being malnourished. And so, you see that reference range moving, like B12. The reference range in Australia is like around 160 to 250 or 650. Sorry, 150 to like 650 roughly around there. And the problem with that is that under 400, there's studies that have shown that you can get demyelination of your axons in your nerves. You actually get nerve damage under 400, right? So full like half of the range of normal in America and Australia and elsewhere, you can actually is actually a true deficiency, and something that you can actually get harmed by. And so that's because so many people are it's like slow on B12. That's just, that's the average. That's what 70% of people are overweight or obese in Western countries, right?
Could that be a cause of MS or
that certainly can be a contributing factor, because you need B12 to remyelinate your axons. Yeah. And so I don't treat MS, but I have spoken to people, and that's one thing they'll give like high dose vitamin D and B12 and things like that. And that sometimes can be helpful. I've also seen that there's an autoimmune component as well, right? So your body's attacking that part, but then you need the building blocks and materials to then regrow that and recover from that damage as well. And so obviously you would want enough B12 as well. Yep. And so you could potentially get more symptomatic and not recover as well between your MS attacks. And but almost all, I've yet to see an autoimmune issue that didn't resolve that didn't respond extremely well to a carnivore elimination diet, where you're just getting rid of all this other stuff that really is causing leaky gut, causing bacteria to get in your body that shouldn't be there, causing lectins and other sort of plant material that is not supposed to be there, that your body's attacking, and is then having cross reactivity with your body. It's called molecular mimicry for those lucky few that have the genetic susceptibility for that. And there are a number of, literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people around the world now with different autoimmunity that are coming to a carnivore diet, or at least going to a more whole foods approach and sort of getting rid of a lot of this stuff and healing their gut. But a lot of people, they go vegetarian or vegan and they get initial improvement because they're eating whole foods and they're getting away from processed garbage. It's even worse, so they see improvement. That's great. But I pick up the pieces on a lot of people that have gone vegetarian or vegan, and at first they do a lot better, and they're doing it, they have a nutritionist, they have a this, they have a that, and they're doing everything exactly the way they're told it's supposed to go. And eventually they start getting more malnutrition and different sorts of buildup of these other sorts of defense chemicals and problems, oxalate poisoning. Liam Hemsworth put himself in the hospital with acute oxalate poisoning from drinking green spinach smoothies every morning for 3 weeks. Wow. Yep. Massive kidney stones, right? Yeah. 75% of, I believe it's 75% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate stones. Certainly a lot of them are anyway. And so, I see a lot of people that get initial improvement, but then end up getting worse down the line, and then they come to eating meat. And I can't tell you, I get a dozen messages a day or more from people saying, I was plant-based, I started eating meat, and it literally changed my life. I'm
in the room. I'm the exact same. Like 6 years of vegetarian, like I said, the first probably year or two felt incredible. And I preached it. I was like, fuck, I feel better. I recover better. I feel less, I'm not as tired. But again, I was making very conscious health decisions. I would make very whole food, less away from all the shit. And which comes with anyone making a dietary change. You're going to put effort into what your health conscious decisions are. But also I became quite lazy after a couple of years. I wasn't, I was eating less of the whole foods, and I was going, I'm busy. I will go get the meat replacement. I will go get the tempeh. I will go get the, the fucking easy meals that I can get on a go. And so that obviously played a part as well. But I'm the perfect example of that. Like switching to the meat or largely whole foods, largely meat, dabbling in fruits, mild vegetables has just been incredible for my change in my health in general, mental health, everything.
That's great. Even
water. I've made conscious decisions with my water intake. Like I have a filter now. It goes through its I think ceramic filter, and it goes through the minerals, adds magnesium, potassium, and whatnot to the water. And even that, just by making that one decision, I've noticed huge benefits just by being conscious about what I'm putting into my body.
Yeah.
But yeah, you see these things, and why? I mean, this is what I wanted to ask you. And I don't know what you can and can't say. Like it's an interesting dicey topic, but especially the push over especially in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen people's health has been an issue when it comes to the COVID pandemic, but not much of a push in regards to people making conscious decisions to improve their health, to be best. Equipped to battle something like a COVID, instead of like, here's this vaccine, here's this medication, take this instead, don't work on yourself. Why do you think there's the push not to work on your own personal health as opposed to have this medicine that we can make money out of?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say what people's motivations are, but the long and short of it is, people just being healthy and eating properly doesn't make anybody money. And so you have, if someone's going to spend money on advertising and lobbying and funding campaigns for politicians and funding the news media and things like that, what organization is doing what I'm doing, saying, hey, if you eat properly, and this is the evidence for eating meat, you don't need all this stuff. I mean, I don't have $20 billion that I can throw around and do that. So there's really no competition. There's only one dog in the fight.
Yeah. And
so there's just these people, they have a product and they're pushing it. And there's no one else saying, oh, actually, I have a counter.
This isn't just localized to the pandemic. This is just in general.
But I'm not sure if that's right, though. I think, there's a fairly big push to have people healthy. Possibly they're giving the wrong message. But I know, like, government agencies now, they're spending lots of money on people to help you with this if you work for the government, stuff like that, especially because of the aging population. Just the information might be... I don't know where you sit on modern nutritionists. The amount of stuff I read from them, it's kind of embarrassing because they're on this thing now that a carb is a carb is a carb, and everything just goes back to weight loss. But like they literally push that drinking cola's not that bad. Just don't drink too much
seed
of
oils
it.
Isn't that bad?
Yeah.
And all these
and to me, like, if your job is making people healthy, like that, there is no reason why you should drink cola.
No.
Yeah, none.
Like,
No.
there's no reason your kids should drink cola. Like all this stuff. Like if that is your job, you should say, no, you shouldn't. Like, that seems fairly obvious to me.
Yeah.
But that's not modern nutritionists.
Well, it wasn't former nutritionists as well, and I'll tell you why. But anyone who says that a carb is a carb is a carb, or a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, is someone who either didn't take or didn't pay attention to biochemistry. Right? You have dozens of different carbohydrates. They all are unique individual organic chemicals, molecules that have unique individual chemical reactions in your body and elsewhere. And then you have dozens of amino acids that are the same thing. They are unique individual chemicals that have unique individual chemical reactions, and the same goes for fatty acids as well. These are all extremely unique. You cannot just say, oh, well, I burned this in the lab and this came off 9 kilocalories per gram, which is what a calorie is. It's heat energy released after burning, incinerating. Well, we're not combustion engines, right? That's not how it works. We're chemical factories. We put in chemicals, they have chemical reactions in our body, right? You cannot reduce that down to just the amount of heat energy that comes out when you burn it, right? There's so much more that goes into it. And also, these are chemicals. they have chemical reactions, and they're different. The chemical reactions of fructose are very different from the chemical reactions of glucose. They're hormone stimulating. They stimulate different hormones. Fructose will block leptin, which is a satiety hormone, but it also has a lot of roles to play in triggering other hormones throughout your body. It also upregulates ghrelin, which is a hunger signal that, when your stomach's empty, it will release ghrelin to say, hey, we have nothing in the pipes. Balance that with the leptin and other sorts of things to see where we're at. If your leptin is reduced and your ghrelin is raised, then you're going to say, oh, my God, I'm hungry. You're going to overeat. And it'll also influence insulin and other sorts of things as well. It also has glycative effects. So glycation is when these carbohydrate molecules physically fuse to other chemicals, non-enzymatic fusion, right? So it doesn't need an enzyme or anything like that. It's just going to stick and irrevocably damage that molecule. They have to basically you have to recycle it, right? And this is called the Maillard reaction. It's a browning reaction that you get when you're like cooking things and it turns sort of brown, or you're toasting bread or something like that. That's sort of what's happening. And that is happening to us. I mean, I work in neurosurgery. I can tell you that, someone who's older and smokes and does all these sorts of things, their bones in their skull look very different than the bones of a young person who's healthy. In younger people, it's bleach white, right?
Yep.
And an older person, especially older person, it might be a bit yellowed, but someone who's like smoking and drinking and putting a lot of toxic stuff into their body, it can be, start tinging brown. Wow. So there's that actual browning of their body that's happening throughout their body. And glucose does this. And we measure this in diabetics and other people with a HbA1c, something that people may have heard of. It's basically the hemoglobin that has been glycated by glucose specifically. It doesn't show up for fructose, from what I understand. It's just glucose will do that, and so we measure that, and that sort of says, okay, how much glycation stress have you been having? Basically, how high has your blood sugar been? So, the higher your blood sugar, the more of these reactions are going to happen. Fructose is something like 7 times more active, so it glycates things 7 times more aggressively than glucose does, right? And we already measure this. You have a high HbA1c, you're diabetic, you're 10 times greater risk of developing heart disease. And so if you're getting your HbA1c up because you're eating, sugar, table sugar that's fructose and glucose, or high fructose corn syrup, which is nearly the same mix of fructose and glucose, or honey, which is even more fructose and glucose, you're going to be, if your HbA1c is rising, you can sort of imagine that, you're having equal parts of fructose in there. You're getting even more glycation stress in your body as well, more of this browning. And so these are different chemicals. They do different things in your body. They trigger different hormones and different reactions in your body. So you cannot reduce them down to the amount of calories. You can, just anyone who says a carb is a carb is a carb it just has no idea what they're talking about. They just clearly have never taken a class in this. Now, the problem with modern nutritionists, as a body, not individual nutritionists, but is this the same as the nutritionists for the last century? And that's because, again, the Seventh-day Adventist Church founded the American College of Nutritional and Dietary, or the American Nutritional and Dietetics Association. They founded nutritional sciences. They founded the university curriculum to teach nutritionists. They founded it, I think it was in 1917. They wrote the first textbook in nutrition, in university nutritional medicine or nutritional sciences in 1925. That's still in print. The current edition is still being taught in Ivy League schools. So there's a lady, Sally Norton, who went to Cornell, studied nutrition, got a master's, and she said her nutrition textbook was like the 44th edition of that Seventh-day Adventist Church
That
thing.
sounds like an insane conspiracy theory.
It does, but it ends up being...
But it's a historical fact, and it's a matter of record. And Belinda Fettke looked into this. I think it's very important for people to see her work. And she's given a number of presentations on YouTube. Gary Fettke has done similar, but this is really her research, and she's just done amazing work with that, really showing this and showing the receipts to everything. Also, it's you know, and so they're always pushing this plant-based agenda. You know, I grew up in Washington State, in Kirkland, just outside of Seattle, and in Kirkland, at least at the time, was the top nutrition college. There was a private nutrition college called Bastyr, and they did sort of postgraduate sort of work. You know, you want to do a PhD or doctorate or whatever in nutrition, or a master's or whatever. That was the number one place to do it. And it was all just plant-based, vegan. I remember just going like, okay, that's crazy. And I didn't think too much of it, but, you know, looking back and all the people that I knew that went there, and how they were just so obsessed with, you know, just plant-based nutrition and things like that, like, makes sense now. Like, the Seventh-day Adventists are writing the curriculum. Yeah. And, you know, and they're being funded by Sanitarium Foods and Kellogg's and all these sorts of things. They have joint ventures with different sorts of, you know, like the Exercise is Medicine campaign. That was founded by Coca-Cola.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, you know, because it's a red herring, right? They're just like, oh yeah. It doesn't really matter what you eat. You just need to exercise. Oh, you just got to get out there and exercise. Exercise is important. You know, we're meant to move, but so is nutrition. I think nutrition is probably more important for a lot of people, because some people are so sick and so unwell, and some people are so heavy that they can't exercise. You're not going to lose weight eating crap and being, you know, 300 kilos. You know, you're not going to be able to work out as much. And so you need to get the nutrition right and then lose enough weight so that you can get off the couch. I talked to a guy just on my podcast, guy Sean White, very nice guy. He was 456 pounds or something like that. So what is that? You know, it's like 200 kilos, right? Yeah, 210 kilos or something like that. Yeah. Right. He couldn't stand or walk for more than 30 seconds at a time because he was so heavy his legs would go numb, right? So he lost his job as a paramedic. He couldn't perform his duties anymore. And then he started getting more and more heavy and sicker and sicker. And he spent 3 years on the couch. 3 years. Wow. He could just make it from his bed to the couch, and he really couldn't do much more than that. Couldn't interact with his kids, couldn't be a husband to his wife, and was very depressed and just hopeless, in his own words. And he came across a carnivore diet. He just said, well, this is stupid. You know, that's crazy. But, you know, he just tried it. And all of a sudden he's like losing weight. And his exercise, when he was able to do it, was walking from the couch to his daughter's door and back on the couch. That's as much as he could do.
Yeah, fuck.
And that's where he started. But he kept going. Because he got the diet right, he kept losing weight regardless of his exercise, and he was able to do more, and now he's down 250 pounds. So so he's down 110 kilos in 1 year.
And see, this is where you say the nutrition is quite important, and the exercise can almost mask a poor diet, which it definitely did for me when I was playing football. I'd eat whatever the fuck I want because I was working out 4, 5, 6 times a week and look shredded. You're like, I must be eating healthy, but I'm eating like shit. So, and I see this with like even some close friends. They've got a family of kids, 3 kids. 2 of the boys are like sticks, but they're constantly running around, constantly doing exercise. And then the other kid is obese. He is obese. And the only difference is he doesn't do the exercise. Now, for me, that's obviously sad. They want to make a change with that. But also the issue I see is these other 2 kids are being fed the same things as the brother. So does that not suggest that potentially what you're feeding all of them is not a great diet, 1, to begin with, and 2, if they weren't doing the exercise, they're going to be just as obese. So potentially, if they're not obese and they're working off the calories or whatever, there's still something bad going on inside, and the things that they're putting in their body aren't great. So surely that's a change that should be being made, I think. But that's just my opinion. But I think that's a physical reflection of what you can sort of see when it comes to nutrition being probably far more important than the exercise to begin with. So.
Well, and you know, that's the thing. So, you know, what most people accept that if you don't exercise, you're not going to be in shape. Right. In shape is from exercise. Right. And so, you know, when I was playing sports, you know, growing up, and then, you know, as you know, high level competitive rugby player, in the off season, I would get fat. Right. It wouldn't get, you know, enormous, but, you know, I would put on fat. I would put on weight, you know, and and then I'd be in and I'd be running my ass off. And like you say, just pushing myself crazy hard. I generally ate pretty clean. I was sort of, my mom was always, she would always cook, and she impressed upon that this was a good thing. So I never didn't really eat out and eat a bunch of, processed foods anyway. It was mostly meat, mostly lean meat, and then some, veg and bread and things like that, because you're supposed to. And in the off season, I would put on weight. And then I, sort of burn down and work off like 40 pounds, in the first couple of months. And when I'm doing just carnivore, just eating meat. So in my early 20s, I was doing this, and just didn't really read it. I just studied botany and biology and cancer biology, and I was just like, found out how toxic plants were. I'm like, I'm not eating those things, and I just stopped eating plants, and I defaulted into eating just meat and eggs. Never got out of shape. Yeah, never put on weight. Never eat off season, on season, whatever. I was always lean and muscular. And now at 43, it's the same thing. I work, quite ridiculous hours sometimes. So I just don't always have the time to work out, and I sort of get out of the habit of doing it, and so on. So this is me out of shape. Yep. Right. But that's the thing. I don't ever get out of shape. Yep. I can get in much better shape. Yes. But I never get out of shape. Yeah. Just like you see like an animal in the zoo. Oh, well, it's all diet. It's all exercise and this, that, and the other. I asked that question when I was a kid. Like, why are we the only squishy animal on Earth? Right? Yeah. It's like why isn't deer and leopards and all these sorts of things? They're just lean and strong and ripped. Yeah. Like, I want to be like that. Why am I not like that? And why wasn't everybody like that? How did we become the most dominant species on Earth? Yeah. Being squishy and sick and having fat ankles and things like that. Yeah.
Well, then the next thing is the only other animals you see are the ones that we've domesticated and taken into our lifestyle. So like dogs now, they're getting all the conditions that we're getting, and we're feeding them less of what they always ate. Yeah. Like I say, I work with a lot of Labradors, the amount of gut issues and stuff like that. And what happens is they're fed grain-fed or grain food and corn food, and it goes in rotations because the dogs will have gut issues, and then they're like, well, get them on this one, and then another generation will go through, and then they'll start getting gut issues. But dogs are getting diagnosed with depression and shit.
And anxiety and lupus, and cancer and all these other sorts of things. There was a book written by Harvard professor Wilhelm Stefansson back in the early 1900s called, I believe the title was something along the lines of, cancer is a disease of civilization. You just don't see this in primitive populations that aren't eating crap, basically. And you don't see cancer in the wild, really, with animals, and you don't really see them in zoo animals that are fed their natural diet. And this is why there are signs at the zoo that say, do not feed the animals. It makes them sick to eat anything that they're not supposed to eat. And then you see signs at the park as well. Yeah. Why is there not a sign on our fridge? Yeah. Say, do not eat this crap. This is not what you're supposed to eat. It will make you sick. And if you talk to zookeepers, they will tell you that if you do feed them that, dog food and grain food and all that sort of stuff, they'll tell you that, no, you can't feed them that, because if you feed them that, they'll get human diseases. Yeah. What the hell is a human disease? Yeah. Right? Diabetes, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune issues, arthritis, all these sorts of things. Those are things that we see in humans. These are non-communicable chronic diseases, right? You cannot catch them. You can't catch arthritis off me, right? Or cancer or lupus or something like that. And yet they're getting this, right? If you feed them human food, they will get human diseases. Okay. Put those two together. Literally it's 2 + 2, right? Yeah. So, you eat the food, you get the disease. So that's not a disease. That's a product of the food. It's a toxic exposure. And this is, the subsequent, manifestation of that toxic exposure.
And if that's not a perfect example of seeing what we're eating is making us sick and giving us our autoimmune issues and all these sorts of diseases that are developing, that's a perfect example. Like we're giving animals that have never eaten like that, and we're giving them food that we eat, or the processed foods and the way we eat our foods, and they're getting those sorts of diseases.
But are you saying there's not the cancer numbers in the wild that you see in humans, or not at all? Because I've seen sharks with tumours and stuff like that.
So,
whether they're
obviously,
cancerous tumours,
obviously
didn't get
it's
close
very
enough to
difficult
look.
because you don't have screening programs for koalas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And they've all got chlamydia.
Yeah, exactly. We know that. Yeah, and well, I mean that's a perfect example of tampering with things. You mess with a complex situation, you're going to get problems. I mean, I believe it was like the Australian government who gave chlamydia to the koalas in the first place because they were just they're just overproducing, and chlamydia can scar up the fallopian tubes, and so the egg can't pass down, so they're sterile basically. And
right.
So like, we'll just do this.
That sounds like an excuse for a PM fucking a koala. I'm doing it to save them. There's too many, all right?
Or just say it's just like what happened. It's just like someone gave this thing chlamydia, tracing it back. Well, no, that was on purpose.
Yeah.
There's too many of them. We need to slow
it
this down.
was in a lab.
I've seen Tom Segura. Have you seen Tom Segura's newest special? And he
I started watching it.
Yeah, and he talked about that specifically. He's like the wildlife instructor said, just be careful. They've got chlamydia.
Yeah.
He's like, what am I going to fuck the fucking koala?
So do I.
I'm sorry, I didn't fuck the koala.
But
Just be careful when you strap up.
Just yeah.
But there was a bloody cuddly animal brothel in Queensland or something.
No.
It got done like I think it was like 5 years ago or some shit.
God.
Well, like an underground thing
Yeah.
on the dark web.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's crazy. But that we'll move on
Sorry.
from the animal brothel.
You're gonna get furries next that are gonna fill that role.
Well,
it's like, I identify as a cat, so predilection for cats. So
what I was going to ask was in regards to the obesity sort of thing. We had a body positivity advocate come on, and she was great. We had a great conversation with her. The one issue I had with Heidi's argument, which I have no problem with her being fine with being obese or the body shaming. I don't want to see anyone be shamed for their appearance. But she had made an argument of what is healthy. Like, how can we say that obesity is healthy? Because maybe that's not healthy. That maybe that's their form of healthy. And my pushback was, no, we can see in data and science that being obese is not good for your health at all. And we're seeing this, again, you can use the pandemic as an example. I think it was 76% of the deaths were in the obese category and stuff. So
and admissions to ICU. There's like 70% of admissions to ICU were obese.
Through the pandemic?
Or
just in general?
Yeah. For COVID, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, but in general, obviously, it is an issue. I think not to shame obesity and not to shame people for being fat, but to try and suggest that obesity and being obese isn't unhealthy. I think that's probably just as dangerous as the fat shaming that can go into people and the mental health issues it can cause. But yeah, can we talk about some of the actual medical issues that obese people can face?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, first of all, I mean, I think that, being happy with who you are and how you look and things like that is very important. And I don't think that anybody should be nasty to anyone based on how they look. We all look different. We all have different, aspects of our body that we'd like to change.
Yeah, of course.
And so, that's not right to do. But you are correct that in general, people that are overweight or obese have more health issues. And it's not necessarily that obesity is the disease. It's not. It's a symptom of the same thing that is causing the other things as well, right? You're eating a whole bunch of garbage that can cause you to overeat. That can cause hormonal change. Your insulin goes up, which is a storage hormone. Puts forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells. It blocks lipolysis, blocks proteolysis. Now you have to keep shoveling in coal in the form of carbs to keep feeding the beast. And that's going to keep perpetuating this. It's going to keep spiking your insulin. It's going to keep forcing in energy into your cells. You're just going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, but not in a good way. You're going to grow unhealthy fat tissue and things like that.
And that's not to suggest that being skinny or being shredded, me as that perfect example of I was eating terribly while I was playing football, but I was shredded. So clearly not a body of health, but looked. So that's not to suggest that being skinny is healthy,
100%.
But to suggest that being obese is healthy is probably going against.
Well, it definitely puts you, in a category where more often You'll have other metabolic issues, but there are a subsection of people. It's not the majority; it's the minority of people that are overweight or obese that are actually metabolically healthy.
Okay.
Right. And so, but that's the minority. You know, there are more people who are overweight and obese that are unwell.
And why are they like metabolically? Are they just people who store fat differently or something like that? Or
can be, but also, you know, there's a difference between eating, you know, starches and things like that, and eating sugar and fructose and seed oils, right? And so you can put on weight if you're triggering that insulin response with different sort of carbohydrates, or you know, it's very, very hard to overeat on a carnivore diet because your body just stops accepting it. You know, it just starts tasting bad, and that because it has negative feedback on the food that you're eating. If you're eating something good for you, it's supposed to have negative feedback. You're really hungry, tastes amazing, your body's like, get this in you. But that gives a negative feedback so that it tastes, the next bite tastes less good, and then less good, and then less good, and then less good. And finally, it doesn't taste really good at all. And you just go, I'm not really interested in eating anymore. You're not stuffed going, oh, I can't eat anymore. It's like, I don't really want to eat anymore. You can keep pushing that. But you have to force yourself. And I've talked to people that don't understand that relationship. And they say, like, well, it's really hard for me because it takes me 2 hours to finish a meal. I get halfway through, and then my body just wants me to stop. It's like, okay, stop.
Yeah.
And so
that's your body telling you, I've had enough.
I did that last night because I just had this big pack of steaks and I cooked them all. Yeah, right. And then got to the last one. And I was like, I'm not eating it, but I really don't want to eat this thing.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And so, you know, if you're eating what you're supposed to eat, you should be able to listen to your satiety signals and hunger signals, right? Unfortunately, when we're eating things that we're not really designed to eat, that disrupts our hormones, and it disrupts our satiety signals, like blocking leptin with raised insulin and putting us into a fat storage metabolism as opposed to a fat burning metabolism. And so this is going to be different. So maybe you can put on a bit of extra weight, but you're not eating the things that are so damaging to your body, like the seed oils and like the fructose and other sorts of processed garbage. Okay. But having some, pasta every night as opposed to, donuts and cookies and crap like that.
And so does that 20-ish minute delay that I've read about in your brain recognizing being satiated, and I guess a throwback to a time back when we were Neanderthals trying to scavenge for food, and we might not have food for 3 or 4 days, so we have to eat more to make sure we're, as far as I've read, that's a response for. But would that have a negative effect now, or is that true, or is that?
Well, I mean, look, that's something that was put forward because people were clearly eating more than they expressly needed, and they said, well, that must have been because you just eat whenever you can, and you just eat as much as you can because there might be a famine next day. Yeah, that doesn't really make sense, because you don't see animals doing that. And you don't see humans doing that in the wild. You don't see the Inuit doing that. And so, when you had like the Native Americans, they would do a buffalo drop. They'd scare a herd of buffalo, bison over a cliff. They'd all crash and burn. They had food for the year, right? There was so they could easily just overeat and just gorge themselves and all that sort of stuff.
But they didn't.
They didn't. King lion gets to eat before any other lion gets to eat, right? It's called the lion's share. He eats as much of what he wants as he wants before anyone else gets to touch it, right? And so he's eating that. He's going for the fattiest parts, fat around the organs, the belly fat, stuff like that. And then at some point he just goes, okay, I'm done. And then the other animals get in. He could just gorge himself puking, but he doesn't. Why? Why does he stop? Why is a koala who's just sitting in a eucalyptus tree? Yeah. That's just, unlimited resources. Why do they stop? Because there's something in them that tells them that's enough. That's all you need. We have that too. It's just that we're eating the wrong things and it disrupts our hormones. We know that now. We know through biochemistry, what is going on there, what the actual mechanisms are. And so, the idea is, well, we probably just were overeating is just telling you, but then why would there be satiety at all? Why wouldn't you just have this voracious hunger? There are medical conditions that people, like pica, that you just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. Now, pregnant women can do this. They eat like inappropriate things like dirt. But there's other people that have other genetic or congenital issues that they really can't stop themselves from eating, and they just eat and eat and eat and eat. And you have to literally, there was one of these kids that went to my school when I was growing up, and his mom had to literally padlock the refrigerator because he would get in there, he would just eat everything, and he would just keep going and keep going and keep going. He really couldn't stop himself, right? So, we have satiety signals for something. At some point, our body's telling us to stop. Why would it overshoot the mark? Why would millions of years of evolution have just messed that up for us and no other animal, right?
Yeah, right.
And so, it's because we're eating something that we're not designed to eat. Now, if you're going in and you're eating seasonal fruit, right? And it's coming in, it's there for 2 weeks out of the year, and you sort of eat that can cause you to say, pack this in, get a little bit extra fat or something like that to store up because winter's coming. Yeah, that might have been an advantage, but having that access all year round, every single day, all the time, that's not an advantage, right? And when you don't have that exposure, your body's telling you, "Yep, this is how much we need," right? And a lot of people, especially during the ice ages, were in these areas. They didn't have fruit. They didn't have honey. They were on ice floes and things like that. And there was just a lot of ice and mammoths, and that was sort of why we were there. When the ice floes were coming down, the fossil record shows that we were actually moving up into the ice. And people will say, "Oh, no, we were just moving towards the equator where the fruit was." No, we weren't.
Yeah, right.
We were going up north where the megafauna was, right? And so, if you're eating what you're supposed to eat, you should be able to listen to your hunger signals. If you are not able to do that, then that's a sign that you're eating the wrong thing. If you need a calculator to figure out what to eat, you're probably eating the wrong thing.
So what do they do? What's happening in our brain and the hormone changes that are that happening? Because if we're eating the wrong foods, I guess that's affecting our hormones, our testosterone levels, a few things like that.
A lot of things.
What's happening in the brain? What's happening in the body that's stopping our satiated feelings?
I think I seen on I think it was Triple J had Dr. Carl talking about they deliberately did it for McDonald's and stuff. There's the mix that you'd have enough with just the salt. So but the sugar with the salt meant that you wanted it more.
Okay.
Or there was a mix either way. I can't remember which way it was, but it was a deliberate tactic that kind of works, where if they didn't have the other one, then you would eat half and be like, that's too much.
Well, that's what food science is, right? Food science is not about making things nutritious and wonderful and good for us. Food science is about making things palatable and have a long shelf life. And so it's the science of making processed food an available product, like a Twinkie that's going to survive, nuclear holocaust. And so, that's what food science is about. Now we think it's just like, oh, these scientists are figuring out what the best thing for us to eat is. That is a lovely thought. That's not what their interest is in. Their interest is in finding something that's highly palatable that people eat, that will continue to have them, eating more of it, right? So when an example of that would be McDonald's, they normally would fry their fries, chips in beef tallow, right, for decades, and everyone's like, "Oh, these are the best chips ever." And then they were like, "Okay, we need to get away from that." The trans fats, people didn't like them. They were like, "Well, these are crap, and we don't like these." So they started adding in beef flavoring into the trans fats, and they're like, "Oh, we like these again." So it's the science of making things more palatable and have a longer shelf life, and there's some other things that go in there as well, but it has nothing to do with giving us proper nutrition and health. And so it's just it's not they're not out for us. We need to have our own back. We put way too much trust in institutions and governments and other people with vested interests that may not align with ours for our health and our well-being, and that's something that's very dangerous to do. And you can do it for a while. When you have Western countries, like in Australia and America and the UK and Europe and things like that, for a long time we've had establishment of the people that have really been like, we don't like this totalitarian crap, you know, and we're going to keep an eye on you. And, you know, like in France, we're going to behead your ass, you know, if you muck around. And in America, we fought wars and all these sorts of things. A lot of wars have been fought to give people the independence and the rights to just, you know, live their own life.
Yep.
And we've had that for so long. We've gotten very, very used to it and lazy. And we think that, oh yeah, that can never come again. Those bad times are gone. Those bad times are right around the corner if you let them.
Yep.
And so now we're very, you know, complacent, and we think that everyone has their best interest at heart. Oh, they wouldn't do. Who's they?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
You know, they are people that have a vested interest in their own products and their own agendas. A very good example of this. You know, we're talking about you know, whether this was like sort of a nefarious, you know, coup to like damage people and things like that. I think that certainly doctors are not trying to damage people.
No,
I think that, you know, a lot of you know, nutritionists, they just like, hey, this is what they're taught and this is what's out there. Lifestyle medicine, we talked about this sort of off air. That's a specialty in medicine. Sounds great, you know, address the lifestyle management, you know, get people eating healthy, get them exercising, and you can hopefully get them healthy and not need these medications. Brilliant idea. I'm all for it. I'm in that camp. The problem with that is lifestyle medicine as a specialty, you know, that you can get board certified in this, was founded by the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 2003. So again, we come back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church infiltrating the medical establishment, the nutritional establishment for their own agendas. And they say, oh yeah, you need to just eat healthy and do this. What is eat healthy to them? Vegan, vegetarian, eat more, you know, plant foods, eat less meat, and exercise. So again, it comes back to these institutions trying to push an agenda on us. Now, there's a religious agenda, but there's also a financial agenda. The major thing that I think, you know, that people should really be wary of is obviously food industry being invested in the pharmaceutical industry and vice versa. That's okay. Well, that's a bit suspicious, right? Because you're feeding people something that may be making them sick, and now you're selling them the sort of the cure. But that's just, you know, that's just a, you know, maybe a conspiracy theory or something like that, or maybe just that doesn't feel good to me.
Yes.
Here's something that really is not good. Kellogg's is vertically integrated. And this is something I learned from Dr. Fetke recently, and he and his wife have just done a lot of work in this. That they're vertically integrated, which is great business model. I think that's a good thing to do. So they grow their own crops that make their own processed crap, and they ship this out. It's all vertically integrated. They own all the steps in the chain, right? One of the steps that they also own is they're actually involved in making pharmaceuticals. What pharmaceuticals are they making? They're making diabetes medication. They're making blood sugar lowering medication, right? So they're growing the crops, making the processed crap, selling, you know, paying for the research, paying for the politicians to push this crap out, paying, you know, writing the curriculum in nutritional sciences to make you eat this garbage.
And then having the cure.
And then selling you the medicine that they know is going to be a consequence of eating this crap. And so to me, that makes me think that they know exactly what they're damn well doing. And honestly, that at that point, I think that's criminal. You know, when you're causing diabetes, you're causing extreme morbidity, early death, mortality. And I mean, just put it in these terms, when you're eating a whole bunch of sugar and carbs and all this sort of crap, your risk of gestational diabetes goes up. When you have gestational diabetes, much higher rates of miscarriage and birth defects. So you're literally killing kids, right? So this is something that they know. This is well documented and illustrated in the literature, that you can hurt people and damage them with diabetes. They can die early, and you can kill kids, right? You can kill babies. So if you know that that's happening and you're knowingly pushing this crap out there, how is that not criminal? How is that not, you know, ripe for a criminal investigation? I think it should be. And that fact that they've vertically integrated diabetes medication on top of the diabetes causing crap that they're pushing out there, I mean, it speaks volumes to me, at least. And I don't think that, I mean, I don't have any proof of their intentions, but it's pretty damn suspicious.
Could it be a side effect to that religious dogma, though, where they believe in what they're doing for, you know, to stop Brandy jerking off.
yeah.
And then this issue is also coming along with what they're doing. So they believe they're helping on on that side. You know, when
Like an unintended consequence.
well, just when you believe in something so
good.
much,
Yeah.
they'll see the other issue, but not necessarily believe they're causing that issue.
Yeah.
And also see themselves as the saviors on that side. I'm just
maybe,
just as an
but
option.
maybe, I mean, for Sanitarium Foods, maybe,
Yeah.
because they're still owned by the church. But Kellogg's has been privately held or publicly held for 100 years now, or whenever that went, because that was a private enterprise from someone who was a Seventh-day Adventist. Now maybe they're still pushing that down, in the C-level sort of block executives that they hire people that are still of that vision. I don't know, but they're at least they are a sort of a publicly held company that we don't know that they have that sort of religious bent. We don't know that, but also, if they're making, like foot creams and things like that, or antivirals or whatever, it's just like, okay, it's just a business that they're going to, but they're making the exact thing, that's a consequence of the crap that they're feeding people.
And you don't just see it in the food industry, you see it, these people lobbying to change policy, you see it in war. You see the industrial military complex profiting from war after lobbying to the guys making the decisions whether we go to war. You see it in the big pharmaceutical companies. They're backed and lobbying policy changes and what can happen in regards to what's going to be pushed when it comes to our prescription drugs and stuff like that. So when it comes to the people who are profiting from these sorts of things, but they're also influencing policy, I think if there's any sort of conflict of interest in any way, it has to be gotten rid of. And it's something so simple that could be you cannot pay for lobbying, or you cannot accept donations from these sorts of people if they're going to be influencing policy. That's just my opinion, but I see it everywhere.
Well, and that was the thing. I mean, it used to be exactly that. I mean, there wasn't you didn't have lobbyists, and a lot of in America, it really only came really after the 30s. Because politicians in America didn't really have all that. They didn't have massive purse strings. They didn't have multi-trillion-dollar budgets to overspend on somehow, right? and so you didn't have power to sell, so there's no one buying, right? And then as soon as FDR changed really broke the Constitution, and because there's very specific clause in there that says, the federal government cannot spend money on anything that does not expressly help the general welfare. That's not going to help everyone, right? So like, like national defense, right? So if you're like an invasion, raising an army, all these sorts of things, you just can't do that, right? And so that was the law of the land for 150 years, right? And then they said, no, well, if I give Branchy money, he's a good guy, he's going to spend that, that's going to have this ripple effect out, and that's going to help more people. So that does help everyone, right? And it was just absolute bullshit. Everyone damn well knew that that's not what it meant, but that was it. So FDR sort of threatened to pack the Supreme Court and sort of got people to sort of flip. It's like, if you don't start passing what I want, I'm gonna pack the courts, and you're never gonna have your vote is never gonna be worth anything again. Yeah. Now Congress and Senate, even though it's a democratically run Congress and Senate, he was a Democrat. They actually were just like, absolutely not. The hell you are going to do that. And that's where the checks and balances that we have, like the different branches going like, you're overstepping. We're going to put your ass down. So they actually were like, no, we're not going to appoint anybody. You can say you want to appoint it, but we're not going to approve anybody. Yeah. So they blocked it, but one of the guys freaked out, and so there was a lot of 5-4 decisions pushing through other stuff. And it really broke the Constitution. And then after that, the federal budget just massively inflated. And now you had Congress and Senate that were able to just spend money on anything. Yeah. And it's a special interest, and this is where a lobbyist then came in, right? And so if you don't have anything, if you don't really have any power to speak of, then you don't have anything to sell. And so now we have that. So now you have it's sort of like economists have estimated it's the best investment in the world, lobbying. You get like 1,000 fold return on your investment, right? You give $100,000 or $1 million to a campaign or something like that, and you end up getting back, a couple $1 billion in tax money for your special interests and things like that. And so, you shouldn't be. This is why a lot of people say we need to get money out of politics, and this is why, because people are being bought and paid for through campaign finances and this and that, and the different major political parties. This is something that people don't understand too. In America, I'm sure it's the same elsewhere. 4 hours out of your day, you have to be basically doing phone calls to raise money for the DNC or the RNC.
Yeah.
Both of them, they both bought a building across the street from the halls of Congress that, halfway through the day or whenever, everyone has to walk across the street and go to a different set of offices so they can call a bunch of big donors and say, hey, why don't you do this? What sort of deals can we make? And it was actually, there was actually a law that says, you cannot use the office of Congress and Senate or whatever, forget the exact wording, in order to fundraise and things like that. Your job is to be a congressman or a senator. That's why you're here.
Yeah.
And so they took the letter of the law as opposed to the intent of the law, and they just made new offices. So you can't use the office. You can't use this office to make those calls. We'll give you another office. You're making those damn calls.
Yeah.
And so they're required. And so, if you run on either of those major party tickets, you're beholden to that. You have to be making calls. And if you don't do it and you're not pulling in money for fundraising, things like that, they're just not going to support you. They're not going to fund your next campaign. And so it is so corrupted and heavily invested, with all sort of money. And that I think really does need to change. And, but if it changes, it's not going to be anytime soon. And so that's why I think it's important to do this as a ground up. People need to know about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, they can only sell stuff to us if we're willing to buy it.
Yeah. And
if we understand this is crap and they're crap, that then we're not going to buy it. And I think that's an important thing to get out there.
Going back to the hormones and the testosterone, because we're seeing a massive decline in the testosterone levels in men.
Well, Delby called on the last podcast from the grave.
Yeah, killed him.
Yeah, he had penis problems.
Yeah.
So
was he being serious about that?
I don't know.
He said he wanted Viagra.
Yeah, he needed Viagra.
He needed Viagra, so he could. What did he call it? It was a fucking. It was like if you're in Mario Kart and you got the turtle shell.
Yeah,
It's like a bonus. I don't know what a terrible fucking analogy, but
I didn't understand it.
But,
he skipped. He just.
Yeah. Now he potentially could have just been doing that because he's going to Tomorrowland and he wants to.
If you want to help him out, buy him a steak dinner.
Yeah,
after.
but what? So we are seeing the levels universally drop.
Yeah.
Why is that? Is that because of the quality of the meat? Or is it the move away from meat, the move into vegetarianism? Is it what's going on there?
It's just fundamentally changing the way we're eating. We're fundamentally changing how our bodies work, right? And hormones have a big role to play in that. Carbohydrates, insulin, these hormones affect other hormones. You were talking about satiety earlier. Why is one person getting full and the other person's not? You eat carbs, anything like that, raises your insulin. Insulin forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells. And so now you're not able to replenish your blood sugar and glycogen and ketones. So now your blood sugar is dropping too low. You feel like crap and you have to eat more carbs, right? It also blocks leptin. That was that satiety hormone that we talked about. And that goes up to your hypothalamus and that tells your brain, hey, we have enough fat. Most of the leptin comes from your fat stores, also from your stretch receptors in your stomach. This is why in the 80s they said, eat a bunch of fiber. It'll just fill up your stomach, stretch it out, release leptin, your body go, oh yeah, we're all good. Well, your bodies thankfully are smarter than those people were. And so it knows that that there's no nutrition there because we actually have receptors in our stomach that actually look for nutrients, macros and micros and things like that. And that's why when you're eating, if you're eating steak and fatty meat and things like that, it's still in your stomach. It hasn't been absorbed yet. And your brain just goes, yep, stop now. Right? Before you are physically stuff packed.
I noticed, yeah.
And that's because your stomach has receptors, goes up to your brain and says, hey, these are the macros and micros that we get. So then blocking leptin, then doing all these other sorts of things. These hormones all have a very important role in so many other things, right? We talked about insulin and the kidneys and retention of electrolytes, right? Insulin affects every cell in your body, really. And leptin is sort of a keystone master hormone as well. It affects so many other things also. And so let's say like in women, right, is an easy example. You start with cholesterol, then you make a couple dozen different sort of hormones. All those hormones are unique hormones that have unique individual uses, jobs, and purposes in your body. Eventually, sort of downstream, you end up making testosterone. Women make testosterone first. We make testosterone first as men. And then that gets converted into estrogen. So women convert testosterone into estrogen in the ovaries, right? And that change is actually blocked by insulin. So if you're having too high insulin, you'll block that conversion of testosterone into estrogen in women, and you'll get too much testosterone, not enough estrogen, and you can actually develop polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, which is the number one driver of female-driven infertility in the Western countries.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Yeah, and that there can be other causes as well, but that's a major one. And high blood pressure, erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction can
Pointed
be
at Brad.
Delby, right?
Yeah.
And that can be an early sign of insulin resistance, right? Because insulin also has a role to play in the contractility of your vessels, right? So if you're just keeping them scrunched and it won't be compliant and stretch out, your blood pressure will go up. So it wants to be able to sort of relax and open up, right? Also, when you're getting an erection, you have to have that artery open up and allow more blood flow in. So that can be, if you're not really getting that compliance and it's not sort of opening up properly like it's supposed to, you're going to have more of a difficulty gaining and maintaining an erection, right? So that can be an early sign of developing hypertension and insulin resistance and later diabetes. And so we're also seeing that people, when they get off carbs, they get off plants and things like that in general. And there's other things in plants that can disrupt your hunger signals on you, like lectins. There's some lectins that are plant defense chemicals. There are lectins in meat too, but they don't seem to do us harm. But the plant ones do. And a lot of them are extremely toxic. Ricin is a lectin, and this is the most poisonous thing that we know of. 1 microgram per kilogram will kill any animal, right? Maybe there's a couple that can have been adapted to it, but basically it will definitely kill us. 1 microgram to kilogram of body weight. And so some of those lectins, through leaky gut, damaging your gut, different sorts of things like gluten can damage your gut lining. Other things can as well. And that gets in your body and can actually bind to insulin receptors, some of these things 5 times more tightly than insulin does. And it also binds leptin as well. And so it can, not eating any carbs, but you still have some of these lectins in there. You can actually still gain weight and have and screw with your satiety hormones as well, and also screw with your other hormones. And so, like in women, you can get PCOS, you can get hirsutism, which is, body hair, inappropriate, hair that you don't want. And you can put on weight, you can have infertility and so on. And, it also, growth hormone is a hormone secreted from our pituitary. It's very important. This is where, like the Liver King and things like that, he got in trouble because he was taking like 10, 12 grand or 11 grand American worth of growth hormone a month. And he was saying, he was just like, my IGF-1, which is insulin like growth factor 1, and his levels were not actually in the levels that he wanted to. I'm just dumping all this money in here and I'm not getting it out. Well, there's a very good reason for that, I think. And one thing that people don't understand, we're taking these things as a supplement. People are bodybuilding and all these sorts of things are taking tons of this stuff. But one thing that people don't realize is that insulin actually blocks the secretion of growth hormone. So you produce less growth hormone if you're eating carbs. And this is why like gym bros are just carbo loading and all this stuff. They're really shooting themselves in the foot. And, because they're eating a whole bunch of carbs, they think that's like a good thing and help build a bunch of muscle. Well, in fact, they're actually blocking growth hormone production. Guys will secrete growth hormone about every 60 minutes, women about every 90 minutes, and then maximally about 2 hours after you go to bed and then throughout sleep. This is why you're not supposed to eat at night. Because it actually, one of the main reasons I think is because you're going to raise your insulin, and that's going to block your biggest hits of growth hormone throughout the night, right? But it also blocks the action of growth hormone, right? So you're getting less growth hormone out, and what little has come out is now being curtailed and damaged, so it doesn't work as well. And so I think that's probably why the Liver King wasn't having the results that he wanted, even though he was taking copious amounts of this stuff exogenously, was because Dude was drinking maple syrup.
Yeah, right.
And so, because he was on the whole fruit and honey and maple syrup side of things. So he's eating a lot of meat. It's great. All for that. But he was also just eating a buttload of sugar, And so, that's going to, raise his insulin, and that's going to oppose growth hormone, right? And so he's not getting the effects that he would have wanted to.
Yeah, okay.
So these lectins and defense chemicals that you've spoken about quite a few times, and you spoke about it on our last podcast. One question I was going to ask, can you cook them out? Is there a way to cook this sort of stuff out? Like broccoli, for example, can you boil it so the carcinogens or whatever are gone and make it healthier for us to have if we wanted to eat them?
Some of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So specifically for lectins, a lot of them are heat sensitive, and but they don't necessarily
what do you
get
find,
all of them out.
Where do you find lectins? Like what?
A lot of beans, like beans, legumes,
okay,
seeds, those sorts of things. You often find those in that. So like kidney beans are just bean. So this is why you have to soak and then boil beans. You can't really just eat them straight, right? So just kidney beans, very common bean that a lot of people around the world would eat and have eaten. Uncooked or undercooked, because actually undercooking can actually make the lectins more toxic, right? So you have to cook these things at completion. And
how do you do that, or how do we know?
You don't really know. It's just that we just sort of throughout time we've just sort of this is your mom says, oh no, you have to boil these for at least 10 minutes or so. So for like kidney beans, it's like boiling for at least 10 minutes. You want to soak them for several hours and then boil them for like 10 minutes at least.
Yeah, and we're not talking canned, like it's chucked in a ball, a liquid of preservatives and whatnot. We're talking like buying them raw and soaking them and then boiling them.
Yeah, and the canned things would already be cooked.
Yeah, done.
They have it already cooked out usually. And so, but undercooking them or not cooking them, WHO has on their website actually says that these are very dangerous, and as little as 5 kidney beans have put people in the hospital.
Wow,
on uncooked or undercooked. 5. That's not that many, right? So you're going to reduce that significantly by boiling it, but not everything will boil out. Not everything will cook out, and this is why fermenting plants and things like that has actually been a mainstay. So soy, super high in estrogen. That's another way these things disrupt our hormones. Is they have estrogenic effects. They have phytohormones and hormone disruptors. They disrupt our normal production and utilization of our different hormones like testosterone and estrogen and progesterone, progestogens, and they will disrupt our normal functioning, and they will also add in a whole bunch of others that will cause merry hell as well. And I mean, to the point that like some like gynecologists at a certain point, or at least different sorts of factions, would say that women going through menopause just eat a bunch of soy. It's just buttloads of estrogen in it, and so it's just like HRT or something like that. Okay, so what does that mean? So why are you giving a young person that?
Yeah,
boy or girl, you're disrupting their hormones, right?
Yep.
And so that's not a great idea. So they have a lot of these hormone disruptors as well. They don't cook out. These other things don't cook out. The sulforaphane in broccoli. My sister was doing her PhD in pharmacology, I think at Johns Hopkins, and then she transferred to UW and did biostatistics. But she said one of her professors was all about this sulforaphane in broccoli, right? And they're like, oh, this is so good, and this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. Well, it is designed as a defense chemical. It is so toxic that it can't actually exist in its full form, right? So it's like a an anime boss, it comes into its real life form at the end.
Yeah,
like Branchy on the piss.
Yeah, you don't want to say it.
You don't want to say that form. Too toxic.
Yeah.
And like so it's only released when it's crushed, right? So what someone's crushed it, mastication, chewing, right? So an animal comes in, starts chewing it, and then that releases these two chemicals, and they bind together and make sulforaphane. It's so toxic that it's just like it's like a kill switch, like kill switch is like, hey, you shoot me, I'm gonna drop this, and it's gonna explode the bomb, right?
Wow.
And so that's what these things make it as, and so I mean, just looking at that, just as an observer, like this is something so toxic that it releases on that as a kill switch. And it can't keep it together, just like cyanide, hydrogen cyanide. This is toxic to just every living life form, right? So there are 2,500 different plants that, again, will make this, have 2 different chemicals that when crushed and masticated will bind together and make hydrogen cyanide. And that's, again, this kill switch sort of thing. And so we're thinking like, oh, it's probably good for us. You know, I was like, well, no, probably not. You know, and they said, well, in these doses and this, that, and the other, it causes, you know, it boosts your immune system and boosts this and boosts these antioxidants and boosts all these other things. I'm like, right, because it's trying to clear that shit out, right?
Yeah.
It's boosting these antioxidants and all these other sorts of things. You don't know what the reason is. You just know that it's an effect. Oh, hey, look, all these antioxidants come up and all these things are responding in a positive way, or they're doing that because they're trying to detoxify you and get this stuff the hell out.
Trying to adjust to something that we're not supposed to eat.
Wow. Now maybe at a very low level,
Yeah.
maybe that's okay.
Yep.
You know, and you can talk this idea of hormesis. Maybe that triggers, you know, immune system and some
a bit like a cold shower. The the stimulation, like it's a bad thing.
Yeah. Maybe. But no one's proven that. I mean, what do we know for a fact that at certain levels this is going to cause a benefit for everybody all the time?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, antibiotics, that gives a hormetic effect. Digitalis gives a hormetic effect for certain people in certain situations. If you have a health condition for which that helps, then a very generally narrow range of treatment range. It's called a therapeutic window. You know, you give a certain amount of medication. This is enough to do the good thing that you want, and not enough to be so toxic that it's defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
Right. So we test these things in big, multinational, thousands of patients sort of things, with medications and things like that. And we know that those aren't always perfect either. But now we're not doing that at all with these defense chemicals. And we're just like, I bet you it is.
Yeah, right.
It's okay. Well, what's the dose then?
Yeah.
And what situation do you need sulforaphane?
Yeah, and how long can you keep putting it in your body? Does it build up?
Yeah, is it always good for everyone all the time? Well, first of all, broccoli didn't exist all that long ago, so probably not something we evolved on, right?
Yeah.
And that was the thing. So, if we didn't evolve on this, if we haven't been eating this for millions of years, then we're not adapted to it, right? And so that you can't say. It's just somebody who just fundamentally doesn't understand biology would say that, eating what we've been eating for 2 million years is not actually healthy for us. That doesn't make any sense, because even if it was unhealthy for us at the beginning, after 2 million years of that, it's going to become good for us. I mean, that's how eucalyptus and koalas came around. Yeah. Eucalyptus is so toxic that almost nothing else eats eucalyptus. Wallabies eat things that are so toxic. It's really basically wallabies that eat those plants. And that's because they're toxic, right? And so you have to, it takes a long time to adapt into that, right? And so if we're only just coming into this in the last 8,000 years, Native Australians, Native Americans, only the last couple hundred years, they get far more chronic diseases than we get eating the same crap we're eating,
food.
right?
Yeah.
Because, and that's what, we were talking about the animals like pets and things like that, and zoo animals getting exposed to this food, eating something they're not supposed to eat, and all of a sudden they're getting diseases that they're not supposed to get, mimicking the diseases that we get when we eat this same food. We have a perfect human example of that. When, the different colonial periods, when people had the technology to actually sail all around the world, and we started going to Australia and North America and South America and all these sorts of things, they found that people in these areas, long before processed foods, right? But they were eating a lot of grains and plants and things like that as a mainstay, some sugar, not all that much, but alcohol. But they found that different native populations were just not getting the same diseases that Westerners were. And they called them diseases of the West.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And then they were just like, we just don't know. Just Western people get this. These people don't get that. And then all of a sudden when those the native people started eating the food of the West, they started getting the diseases of the West.
Yep.
And then they stopped calling it diseases of the West and things like that. They just call it it's just getting older.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now we call them human diseases, because now they're spreading into animals. They're spreading into our pets. They're spreading into, if you are stupid enough to feed a zoo animal that, there are, zoos that aren't as ethical as others, and they just feed them sort of garbage because it's cheaper, and animals aren't as healthy. So, now we're calling it human diseases. Oh, if you do this, then they get human diseases. And these are just diseases we only see in humans. You don't see those in wild animals, right?
Yep.
And we give them human food. All of a sudden they're getting human diseases. I mean, this is very straightforward. And so people saying that, no, what you need to eat is the stuff that's never existed before, like broccoli and seed oils, and not the stuff that we've been eating for 2 million years, 3 million years plus as a mainstay of our diet. That is someone that's not really worth having a conversation with, because they just fundamentally don't understand biology.
Yeah. It's very interesting you brought up that kidney bean stuff before, because I've had that exact scenario where during my vegetarian time, I was making those health conscious decisions and stopped wanting to use the canned stuff. So I decided to buy some raw stuff. Didn't cook it enough.
Right.
I don't know what I blamed it on, but it was really bad. I had these kidney beans, threw up everywhere, got a rash, fevers, the whole lot, and potentially, and I still had no idea. Could be drawing a longbow there, but it was literally.
I think that's exactly
it was
what
a
happened.
couple of hours after I probably undercooked it or whatever it was, and it was really bad. Fucking fevers, sweats in the bed, cooked me, and I potentially that's what was up.
Yeah, well, one of the nuts is the same. What is it? It's one of the spreads. Not macadamia. Fucking forgot what it is, but
like almond,
like a
butter
cashew or something.
It's not almond. It's it looks weird because it grows on the end of the fruit, the little nut.
Oh, cashew.
Yeah, cashews.
Yeah.
Okay, them raw. Bad for you, uncooked.
Really? And that's so interesting, because I was able to just go buy these kidney beans, not knowing that maybe I needed to cook them more, and it's made me violently ill. Potentially, and you said, some people have ended up in hospital. That's very interesting.
Probably should have ended up in hospital.
Yeah.
I'm a fucking, but I guess that sort of push towards meat and going towards the vegetarian side has been popularized by certain documentaries. But I see that you recently did a documentary over in Costa Rica, the meat healing. So I'm interested in that, because my general opinion, without the scientific knowledge to back it up, is less it's the meat that's making the healing process, and it's more the eliminating of the shit food and the constant processed food, seed oils that we're putting into our body, which are making us sick. That's how I feel, because when I went on that meat carnivore diet, I likened it to fasting. I had the same sort of withdrawals, headaches, broke through, felt fucking incredible. Inflammation left, clarity. I'd love you to explain the clarity in my mind. But my general thoughts were, it was less because I was eating meat. It was more because I'd eliminated the shit. The only difference I felt was I felt far more energized in a fast because I was, putting in a right amount of nutrition and sustenance, I guess. That's the biggest difference I found. Do you find, if it was sustainable to do it the same way, like fasting, is that similar? It's a similar process, I'm assuming?
Very similar, yeah. And I think that is the real benefit of fasting, is not eating garbage. You're not pulling in all this high octane crap that is causing harm, and you go into a so-called fasting metabolism. When I was taking biochemistry, 20 years ago, that's what we were taught. They were like, this is a fed metabolism, this is a fasting metabolism. When you eat, your metabolism looks like this, and when you don't eat for 24 hours, it changes into this other pathway, and it looks something different. This was supposed to be like, if you were lost in the desert and you just you couldn't eat for days and weeks or whatever, this is what would protect you. For failing to recognize that when you eat anything else except carbohydrates, it also looks like you're in a fasting metabolism. So anything else on earth besides carbohydrates, and you look like you're fasting, right? So I don't think that is a fasting metabolism. I think that's our primary metabolic state. That's the primary metabolic state of most animals in the wild. Yeah, because they're all in a state of ketosis. They're all running on fat and protein. They're not running on carbs. So what about herbivores or even frugivores? They're eating all this sort of stuff. Well, the majority of the calories that they're getting is actually from fiber. And no vertebrate animal can break down fiber. We certainly can't. And so that should also tell you that why we shouldn't be eating fibrous plants, because we don't have the ability to break down fiber and gain nutrition from it. And yet we're calling it an essential nutrient, even though it has no nutrients, right? Which makes no sense. It actually blocks absorption, can cause malabsorption and block you from absorbing different nutrients. So it's actually an anti-nutrient, really. But animals that eat fiber in the wild, by and large, are able to break down fiber. And it's not they that are doing it, it's actually the bacteria in their guts. So they cultivate certain bacteria that eat the fiber. No vertebrate animal can break down fibers. It's the bacteria that eat the fiber. And as a waste product, basically their waste, their feces, if you will, are short-chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated. And then the bacteria die off and they get digested and absorbed as protein. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah. So gorillas that just eat green leaves and cows that just eat grass, they're eating grass and leaves, but what they're absorbing is fat and protein.
Wow.
Right. And so a cow and a gorilla is in a ketogenic starvation state, right? It's not a starvation state. That's what they're supposed to be in all the while. And in fact, when we fatten up cows and we want them to put on weight, we want them to put on fat, we want them to get that intramuscular marbling, right? Which is called myosteatosis. And we see this in MRIs. I see this all the time in MRIs. People having fatty streaks throughout their muscles, in their backs and everything like that, all right? So we get the same thing. So how they do that is by giving them carbs, giving them grains. And this jacks up their insulin, forces energy into cells because your body's going, sweet Jesus, what has this idiot done? Your blood sugar is going up and up and up. This is causing glycative stress. Your body recognizes this as a toxin, and it responds to clear the toxin, right? But it's just sort of forcing it anywhere it can go. So it'll go into glycogen in your muscles and your liver, but also into your fat tissue, and it also deposits intramuscular fat. And that's why we do this for cows, to get that intramuscular fat, that marbling. And then we forget that this is doing that to us as well.
Wow. So,
right.
But I find it interesting because as far as I was aware, the fiber in fruit and these sorts of things are helping turn the sugar that we're ingesting, instead of that turning into fat on our body, it's turning it into energy. Am I wrong with that? Or
well, it mitigates the sugar contained in the fruit. You know, going back to what I was saying, that it actually causes malabsorption.
Yeah.
So it actually blocks your body's ability to absorb all the sugar and fructose, right? So then it just passes through, and then your gut bacteria eat it when it gets to your colon and things like that, or you just excrete it. So it does reduce the amount of sugar that you're getting in. So if you ate 6 oranges, right, or you juiced those 6 oranges and drank that,
yes, very different.
You would absorb more of the fructose and the glucose from the juice than you would of the actual whole oranges, because of the fiber.
Which is why I stopped having juices, because I realized that basically on this raw format was if you have a fruit juice, you might as well be having a can of Coke.
Oh, absolutely, with a vitamin. You know, that's
exactly.
It.
And the obvious micronutrients and stuff that you can get out of it. But that's very interesting, because that does make sense. I was like, I'm having the real raw fruit, because it's got the fiber, it's turning that sugar into energy, not for fat. But hearing you say that it's not that, it's just blocking it from being absorbed.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I've seen some people say that no, fructose is not that big of a deal, because when you eat it and you absorb it, it actually gets turned into glucose. Well, maybe some of it does, but not all of it does. You know, we do know it goes to the liver, and this is processed actually in the same, it goes down an aldehyde pathway and actually ferments and turns into alcohol. Right? And then gets broken down into the same byproducts as alcohol. Wow. There's a couple of interesting sort of caveats with that as well, but it gets broken down in the same byproducts as alcohol. And so it causes a lot of the same damage. So it causes fatty droplets. It gets metabolized as one of the byproducts is actually fatty droplets that are in the liver now. So you get fatty liver, you get cirrhosis, you get diabetes, you get heart disease, even implicated in things like cancer and Alzheimer's, right? So not great. You know, a lot of things that you get from alcohol, you could do that. And some of the time, you know, it's actually theorized that this can actually, because of this going down that aldehyde pathway, it can actually cause a bit of an alcoholic effect as well. And there are some people that can get gut dysbiosis. And it's called, what's it called? It's called like autobrewery or something like that. The gut bacteria are eating all these carbs and things like that, and they're actually fermenting alcohol. And that actually gets absorbed. And so there are people that have been done in America, and I'm sure elsewhere. Yeah, because
I've ate on the bread, officer.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. But that's it. Their lives get ruined because they're like, I absolutely have not been drinking. This is bullshit. I'm going to fight this, or they're not going to take a plea. They're going to go and fight this. I'm like, well, bullshit. You're
off your
blue, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have this on your blood and all this sort of stuff, and it's just like you're full of it. And they can ruin their lives for that, and so that's something that I actually had a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Sean O'Mara, who I've had on my podcast. He actually just gave he and another doctor were talking about this on a radio program in America last week, and talking about this. This is an actual diagnosis that can happen, but it's not something that prosecutors really know about. And he was actually a criminal prosecutor for a number of years, and then he was a police officer, and then a criminal prosecutor, and then he switched into medicine. And so he's actually going back and talking to his attorney, prosecutor, and defense colleagues, saying, "Hey, this is a real thing.
Yeah.
This is something we should be aware of."
Wow.
Yeah.
Fuck. Could you imagine? Getting done. Just been eating bread.
Yeah. Just been to the bakery.
Fuck.
Yeah. Well, now everyone's going to be doing it.
Yeah,
just drinking, just eating donuts.
We have a few Patreon questions that I was going to ask while you're on. Let me get them up.
Can I ask a couple questions just around scurvy?
Yeah.
So, funnily enough, I think the last person diagnosed in Australia with scurvy was a comedian over in Melbourne called Chris Franklin.
Was he?
Yeah, apparently.
He's a bloke.
Yeah, well, he did the comedy festival, and all he ate was like meat pies and drank VB, and got the last diagnosis of it.
Yeah. Good for him.
Yeah. But with like this diet, obviously there's people that are doing bastardization, like attempting the carnivore diet but still drinking piss. Is there a worry with that?
Yeah.
Is there ways to mitigate that? Is it like just eat liver or?
That can help. I mean, certainly, when you're eating things that can act as an anti-nutrient or disrupt your normal workings, then having more nutrient-dense things like liver is probably a good idea. Organs in general are very nutrient-dense. I think you need to be careful of because they are so nutrient-dense. You can actually get an overabundance of them, like difference with, copper and vitamin A and all these sorts of things. Like in liver, there's quite a lot of them. So if you're eating just a ton of liver, then that could be a problem if you're just eating a carnivore diet. If you're eating like a mixed diet or a standard, Australian American diet, which is very nutrient poor, liver's your best friend. I mean, that's something that's probably just going to keep you alive. But, you don't want to eat outside. If you're eating a carnivore diet, you don't want to eat outside of the proportions of the animal, right? So we have to think about, how we would see this in nature. We take down a buffalo. We're going to eat that buffalo. It has, big, massive animal. That thing has skeletal muscle, meat, and fat that will last us as an individual, 2 years or so, depending on the size of the animal, right? It's got one liver. It's got one heart. It's got 2 kidneys, 1 spleen, right? So, that's going to last you 2 years. And really, it's probably, probably dry these things out. But, I don't know how often native populations would really, dry out and preserve the organs. That they would definitely do that with the meat and make pemmican and things like that. But like native like the Inuits, things like that, would not eat the organs. They would feed those to the dog because you're eating marine predators like seals and then polar bear and whales and things like that. The concentration, because they're up the food chain, the concentration of those things are so much higher that they're actually toxic to us.
Yep.
And so you don't necessarily need to eat that. So if people are going to eat organs, I just think they should do it in proportion of the animal, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And so you don't have to have too much.
How often do you eat liver or not?
Extraordinarily rarely.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I've eaten, combination of cow and sheep liver maybe 3 times in the last decade.
Yeah,
Wow.
okay. Shit.
I've had some cod liver a couple times. It actually tastes nice, sort of sweet, and very pleasant, but very rarely. I mean, I think you can get you can get pretty much everything you need, even if it's grain finished. You're still getting almost everything. Really everything you need. Most people will be. I've checked my bloods a few years into this, and everything was all on optimal levels. So I'm like, okay, I feel good. My numbers are all good. I don't need to worry about it. Every now and then, you know, might have some, but that's it. Some people will metabolize things a bit differently. Some people with like the MTHFR gene, they have a problem, you know, metabolizing folate, right? And so they might need a little bit more. So some people will get sort of slightly low folates, and it could be that they have this genetic aberration, or that their just metabolism is just slightly different. A lot of them aren't symptomatic, but some people could be. And especially this is something to know about in pregnancy or wanting to get pregnant, because low folate levels, you know, are associated with neural tube defects like spina bifida. So that's an important one to know about. And if you're one of those people, you probably need to add in a bit of liver.
Yep.
Right. But you know, to your original question, depending on what you eat, you need a different constellation of nutrients, right? So we have the RDAs, and you say, oh, you're not getting enough vitamin C, you're not getting enough this, you're not getting enough that. Okay, that's only in the context of eating a mixed diet.
Yep.
Right. And so when you're not eating all these different sorts of things, you're not getting the anti-nutrients, you're not getting the phytic acid that's binding to all these different minerals, you're not getting the oxalates, which does the same, you're not getting tannins, which can bind proteins and other sorts of things and stop you from digestion, you're not getting all the protease inhibitors that stop protease as a enzyme from your pancreas that starts breaking down these big you know, proteins and into their constituent amino acids so you can absorb them. You're getting rid of a lot of things. They're actually stopping you from absorbing things properly and utilizing them appropriately, right? So when oxalates get into your bloodstream, they turn into oxalic acid, which we use to like strip rust off of buildings, right? And that's happening in your body. And so this can bind and strip out things like calcium, make these calcium oxalate stones and kidney stones. It can build up in your tissues because your body's trying to sequester this out, and you can actually see oxalate crystals in different tissues and can damage those tissues. And you have to strip out calcium from your bones to replenish your serum calcium, because if your calcium gets too low, your heart stops. Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay.
So, you know, obviously not what you want. And so your body's trying to mitigate this by basically, you know, giving you osteoporosis and decades down the road. And so there are tons of these different things that really severely affect what we need, right?
Yep.
And so for vitamin C, for example, you know, first of all, we have to think about what do we need vitamin C for in the context of scurvy. Now, vitamin C does other things in our body as well, but we need very, very small amounts of it. For scurvy, this is because it helps hydrolyze two amino acids, proline and lysine, so that they can form properly bonded, tight molecules of collagen, right? And so if those are not hydrolyzed and they're sort of loose, they're not sticking together properly, and it's just weak material. You know, you're just building a house out of straw instead of bricks, right? And it's just gonna tear apart. Your vessels are breaking. Your gums start bleeding. You start having aneurysms form and start bursting blood vessels, all these sorts of things, and having a lot of sort of issues. You die from this. Very dangerous, right? But when you're eating a lot of meat, you are getting a lot of those prehydrolyzed proteins, right? And so you don't need as much vitamin C to make that reaction. So this is why, you know, the Brits were like limeys, right? They called them limeys because they had limes and they were going around sailing a lot, and they were getting scurvy. But it was actually only the sailors, like the general sailors, that were really getting it. Other people may get it too, but a lot of the officers weren't getting it because they were being fed meat, and the sailors were being fed a bunch of gruel and grog and things like that. So they're getting alcohol. It's not going to be great for you, and you know, carbs and grains and things like that. They weren't getting really much meat, and they were getting these problems. From what I understand, speaking to a few people who've looked into it, apparently American sailors at the time, you know, thought they were just full of it. They were like, you guys are stupid. Like they weren't getting the same problems because they were being fed different things. The Vikings, who traipsed all over the world, you know, it was like, you know, Leif Erikson likely made it to North America in the 11th century, right? Mm-hmm. They just had barrels packed full of salted meat.
Yep.
Right. They didn't get scurvy.
Yeah. Okay.
They didn't bring limes or anything like that. So that's, you know, hey, we're designed to eat meat. So if you're just eating meat, you're going to get everything that you need in the proportion that you need by definition. Right. Yep. And so specifically with vitamin C, you need more of it if you're not getting enough, you know, protein in meat and things like that, and collagen, importantly, right? Because you can get amino acids from plants,
Yep.
right? They're not as bioavailable, because that's another way that plants defend themselves is they lock up their nutrients in ways that are difficult to break those chemical bonds so that we can access it. Because again, we're not a combustion engine. We don't burn these things. We need chemical processes to strip these things out and break those bonds, like fiber, right? That's strings of glucose. We could use glucose, but we can't use fiber, right? Because those are bound up in ways that no vertebrate animal can break apart. So they have to go through these circuitous ways of actually accessing that nutrient and using it as a nutrient. Protein is similar in the sense that it's bound up in ways that are difficult to access. There's protease inhibitors that make it more difficult for you to break down any proteins, and there are other nutrients and things like that vitamins and minerals and things like that are bound up in, like calcium in spinach. There's a lot of calcium in spinach, but there was experiments done in the 1950s giving people a lot of spinach to try to bolster their calcium up. Their calcium went down, because the calcium in spinach and iron as well is not bioavailable, and it's not bioavailable to us. And they also contain oxalates, which also strip out even more calcium, right? So you give someone this thing, this has a lot of calcium, and you give it to them and their calcium drops. Okay, what the hell's going on? So everything's going to be different depending on what you eat. And so the vitamin C, or the proteins and things like that, you need collagen. You need the right kinds of amino acids and the right kinds of proteins and collagens and things like that from meat. It's not just getting an equivalent amount of protein from plants. Even the bioavailable equivalents is not going to be enough. So you'll need more vitamin C then. But also, and probably more appropriate to your friend who's eating a lot of carby sort of stuff, some meat pies and things like that, but it has a lot of other crap in it too, and a lot of alcohol and carbs, is that carbohydrates look very similar chemically in their chemical structure, molecular structure, to vitamin C. Vitamin C sort of looks like a carbohydrate, sort of like a fructose molecule with a little tail on it.
Yeah, right.
And so they actually compete for binding sites. There's a GLUT4 transporter. Right.
Yep.
And so when you have a ton of carbohydrates,
you need more
vitamin C. Because you're going to drown it out. Usually you're going to be awash with carbs. You have a plate full of pasta or a bunch of meat pies or something like that. That's a lot of carbs.
Yep.
That's a lot of glucose molecules running through there using those receptors. So you need a massive abundance of vitamin C just to make it in the shop.
Yeah, right.
And so, if you are eating carbohydrates, then the RDAs are likely correct that you need vitamin C measured in milligrams.
Yep.
Right. You need about 10 milligrams of vitamin C to stave off scurvy. That's what's said in the RDAs, and so they recommend 90 to 120, depending on the formulation that you're looking at. But if you're not eating carbohydrates, then you need vitamin C measured in nanograms. Which is 1 million times less, right?
Yep.
So it's a different story, and you'll get more than enough vitamin C for certainly scurvy and anything else you're doing by just eating meat, if you're only eating meat.
Yep.
And in fact, going back to the whole regeneratively raised, wild animals and this, that, and the other, there are so many more micronutrients and vitamins and minerals and things like that I've spoken to ranchers that do regeneratively raise, and they actually measure their vitamin C, and actually their meat fully accounts for the amount of vitamin C, even if you were eating a mixed diet.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so they have more than enough vitamin C in there as well. So so eating naturally and things like that, like animals that are eating what they're supposed to eat as well, which will be more healthy for them, more healthy for us.
Yep.
That's not even an issue.
All down the food chain, yeah.
Yeah,
that's insane.
But even without it, we're still fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
We'll get to we're about 2.5 hours in. This is bloody good. So I've got so many more questions. I could keep going, but I haven't communicated this very well to the Patreons yet, but I did put a message out on Patreon for only Patreon members that they can ask our guests questions from now on. Not general members of the public, so you gotta
fuck them.
Yeah, fuck them.
Gotta pay to ask them a question.
Yeah, exactly. So Patreon's a very difficult platform to navigate. Like you don't necessarily get notifications when we post or something. So just keep an eye out, Patreon members. But we had a few questions. So Brad Morrison Hey boys, my question is, currently I have an L4, L5 disc bulging 4 millimeters and L5, S1 at 5 millimeters. Will a carnivore diet help the inflammation and reduce the bulging disc? I misused anti-inflammatories back in 2010, probably for another back problem. I've created a huge gut and esophagus problem, so looking for ways to reduce inflammation. I'm booked in to see a neurosurgeon in late September, but would this improve my day-to-day life?
Yeah, well, I'll take this one.
Anything on that one?
Well, look, it's we don't have any control trials and things like that on this, obviously, and you actually do in damaged cartilage in orthopedic like knee cases and things like that this seems to be a product of glycation and oxidative stress and things like that from eating this crap. And so if you stop eating this stuff, it can actually help heal your cartilage. And I don't know to what extent, but that was something that Dr. Chaffee was telling me, and that's his purview. And we were actually talking about discs in particular, and he was saying that he would imagine, because it's similar material, that the same process is going on and damaging the disc material as is the knee cartilage and other joints. But he couldn't find anything in the literature. That experiment just hasn't been done yet.
Okay.
So I can't tell you, for sure based on a study, but I can tell you from for sure that going onto any ketogenic diet, getting rid of carbs and sugar and things like that will reduce your inflammation. 100%. You're going to be reducing the amount of things that come into your body that cause inflammation. So that's a good one. But also just having higher ketone levels has been shown to reduce inflammation itself. So once you start eating carbohydrates, it actually reduces your ketones because it's raising insulin. Insulin blocks the lipolysis, which is the breakdown of your fat into ketones that we use as energy, right?
Yeah.
So your ketone levels are going to get suppressed, and those ketones are not then going to be able to suppress inflammation. So you're bringing in more inflammatory factors, and you've gotten rid of one of your main anti-inflammatories, right? So going the other way, you're going to reduce your inflammation, right? So I've had, in my own experience, a lot of benefit from that. I don't have joint pains. I have a bit of back pain, but if I stay active and moving, things like that, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
As soon as I eat like any carbs, like a little bit of carbs or something like that, like it's mixed in with a meal that I'm eating at a restaurant, something like that, I like stabbing back pain for 4 days.
Yeah.
And so
is that probably, do you think, because you're so not accustomed to having it now, so it has an even bigger effect on you? Because I have similar when I have carbs. And it's a very simple fix for me. Like, just fucking go back to eating well. And it's funny because I have a very bad back. I've had a very bad back for a long time. Delby's exactly the same. And I do, in my heart, believe that if he addressed a few things and did some certain exercises, ate better and drank less and blah, 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 he could have avoided a lot of it. But
could still reverse a lot of it.
Yeah, 100%. But it's a very notable change. As soon as I have poor diet, poor exercise, poor like if I'm drinking too much alcohol, back flares up.
Absolutely,
straight away.
Well, and part of that's just going to be, it's damaging, and you've been out of it for a long time, and you're like. You like not having horrible pain. Yeah. You can get used to being in horrible pain all the time, maybe taking painkillers and all that sort of stuff like this gentleman. And but when you get out of that and you're just like, oh, okay, this is really good, and you go back to that, it's like, absolutely not. I don't want to do that. But it is true. People say that, well, maybe there's a hormetic benefit from eating poison. Okay. But is there a hormetic benefit from drinking alcohol? Some would say yes, because, well, when there's something happening, your body, builds up these different sorts of, defenses and tolerances towards alcohol. Okay. But is that giving you an overarching benefit, or is that only giving you a bit more defense the next time you encounter alcohol?
Are we doing that with vegetables, fruits, stuff like that as well?
That's it. So it's called tolerance. It's not hormesis. It's tolerance. Okay. So we're building up a tolerance to a drug. You take cocaine. The next time you take cocaine, you need a little more and a little more and a little more and a little more to get the same effect.
Don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, but that's understood, that you build up a tolerance towards poison, right? Yeah. Drugs are poison. You just like. Some people like the effect of those poisons, but they build up a tolerance to that. And that's the same thing with alcohol. That's the same thing.
Rasputin do that to arsenic or some shit?
Oh, did he?
Yeah, I think.
You can do it. You can do it to pretty much anything.
Yeah, that's how he got at the end, where it was they tried to kill Rasputin with arsenic. And he he'd been taking it in
Small
small
doses.
doses.
What?
Yeah.
I guess don't they do that with some, like with the peanut allergies? Some of the people trying to get in the
Exposure.
SAS, they do that, like get a cut and they'll rub it on it like constantly for months and months and months, and by the end of it, they're sort of okay and they're accustomed to it.
Some of the allergy sort of things, you can get like allergy shots and things like that, and it sort of gives you a bit of exposure, and you sort of get desensitized.
What do they call that?
it.
What's is it like exposure over time? Is there a name for that? Someone said it to me the other day. Come on,
probably.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say too, but that historically has happened where people have built up a tolerance to different poisons and things like that. And like Princess Bride, you remember that? Like they did that with like iocane powder,
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
both
like
were
killed the
poisoned.
dudes. Like yeah, exactly. So I poison one cup of wine, you get to choose who drinks what, and then the dude drops dead. And it's like, oh, so the poison was in your glass the whole time. I was like, no, they were both poisoned. I've just spent the last 5 years building up a tolerance to it. There was a guy, I really hate that I can't remember his name because I literally just talked to a patient of mine yesterday who told me this story. But it was an ancient Greek king, and he attacked like a Roman province. Like, not a great idea, but in the height of Rome.
Yeah.
Mess around with that. And so they came back after him. He was very paranoid, probably like Rasputin, about being assassinated. So he built up a tolerance to like hemlock and a bunch of other poisons of the time, so that he couldn't really be poisoned. And then he goes and messes with the Romans, not advisable.
Yeah.
And they came over to get him, and they're just surrounding the city. They're surrounding his citadel, whatever, and he's just like, shit, all right, I'm going to be in prison, and I'm going to be tortured, I'm going to be crucified, I'm just going to either die on a cross or die rotting in a jail cell, or not nice jail. You don't get yard time.
Yeah.
No TV.
No, yeah, exactly, and a Nintendo. And and so, it's awful. I mean, being in prison in general is awful. This was even worse. It was as bad as it could get.
Yeah.
And so he was like, don't want that crap. And so he like slugged back, like a Socrates dose of hemlock, try to kill himself, and he didn't die.
Oh no!
He couldn't kill himself with hemlock. It's like the
Jesus.
irony of that. you
Yeah.
know? And so he ended up, rotting in a prison cell for years. They didn't crucify him. They ended up just having him rot there, and he just died in there. It was just a horrible existence.
Yeah. Wow, your body adapts to poison. Wow.
Yeah. So, so you would get tolerance to these things, and when you get away from these different sort of food toxins, and then you re-expose yourself to that, yes, you're going to see a more extreme example of that, and you're going to see the contrast of it. So it's really going to be unpleasant.
Does that mean though that we could, if we're able to develop tolerance to certain vegetables, that they're apart from the obvious negatives that come with them, there's benefits that come with them, the micronutrients and nutrients we can get from them. So does that mean if we're developing tolerance to broccoli or fucking spinach or anything, tomato, does that mean we the negatives are minimal, not having an effect, and we're going to be able to get the benefits out of them, or do we just not know? You'd rather not.
I don't think anyone has ever actually shown that one way or the other, but you could say that, having built up a tolerance, you'll get more bang for your buck once you have a tolerance. But that doesn't mean that this stuff is not still damaging you, and it doesn't mean that the nutrients outweigh the harms, especially because you get everything you need in the proportion you need it just from eating a steak.
Yeah, okay.
Right, or an egg, right? And so you don't need those things. You don't need them. It's survival food. Right.
Okay.
And that's what we've used it as. And I think it does confer a survival advantage. A cat, lion, something like that, they're obligate carnivores. Most plants will just kill them. And yet they can survive. House cats can survive on up to 60% of their calories from carbs. Right. Does that make them not an obligate carnivore? Does that mean that grains are good for them? No. It means that life adapts, and they're not adapting, but life is very robust and can survive pretty amazing conditions, right? That doesn't mean that it's good for them. And we are better able to do that.
And I'm interested because I'd say a vast majority of the people listening will take on what you're saying. They'll potentially try the carnivore rigidly for a while, but eventually go back to at
Some
least
sort of thing,
some sort of balanced whole foods diet. At the very least, you'd expect. Some people will go back to whatever.
Yeah.
But some people will go back to a whole foods balanced diet. I'd probably put myself close to that category. Is it and that's more out of not boredom, but just like, hey, I want to be able to go to a restaurant and not have to be too rigid with what I'm eating. And I think a lot of people feel the same. So is there ways that people who will really listen and resonate with what you're saying can sort of integrate a bit of both into their life and still have benefits of living a healthy, prosperous life?
You're definitely going to benefit from removing a lot of that garbage. And
Of course,
anyone who removes processed foods and sugar and seed oils and all that sort of stuff is going to improve greatly.
Yep.
And eating more fatty meat is also going to improve your health a lot because we need those nutrients, right? Those are the nutrients that we need the most. And so going in that direction, I think is a wonderful thing. And if that's what people want to do, and if we could get everyone doing that, the amount of chronic diseases that we face, it would just really almost go to nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm all for that. I think the best way to do it is only eating exactly what you need and not taking in anything that you don't. And so that's why I do what I do. But I think if people want to try it, I encourage them to. I would encourage them to try at least 30 days or so of just fatty meat and water, like fatty, like beef, red meat's the best. And then see, and then you want to sort of sample something back in, you try it one at a time. Just pull that back in. What does this do to me?
Yeah.
Am I okay with that? Some people will, get rid of coffee, then they'll add coffee back in, and maybe they like the experience of drinking coffee and going to coffee houses and things like that.
Yeah, I draw
more
the
than
line.
the detriments.
Yeah.
But for me, I was never a big coffee guy anyway.
Okay.
But it didn't really make me feel good at all ever. I get like 1 cup in 20, and I'd be bouncing off the walls. Like, oh my God, this is what people feel like when they drink coffee. No wonder, you know. And most of the time, I didn't actually feel as good. I got brain fog and just all sorts of other sorts of just didn't feel great. And the opposite of what coffee is supposed to do to you. And so I would drink coffee sometimes, and I got used to it sort of, in my intern year because I needed something to survive. Like I wasn't doing carnivore then. And so, I would have some sometimes. And then when I went back on carnivore, when I was, in my 30s, I had all the stuff out of my system for a few weeks. I was doing like bigger workouts. I couldn't get sore. It was crazy. I couldn't work hard enough to wear myself out.
Yeah.
I was going to failure every single set. I ended up doing 32 sets of squats. People don't believe that happened. And try it. See what happens. And if you're doing it on a carnivore diet and your body's working, you can just as long as you give yourself enough rest. Now I can wear myself out by I give myself like no rest. I do like what Serge Nubret and Vince Garanda did, which I basically have 30 seconds rest between upper body sets and 60 seconds rest between lower body sets. And I just go until I'm worn out. You get sort of 8, 12 sets or whatever. And that's really the only way I can sort of wear myself out. But if I rest again and then come back, I can keep going.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I don't get sore. At all.
I did notice the sustained level of energies that I had. No ups, but no downs. Just a sustained level of feeling good.
Yeah.
And then the lack of inflammation, the sore joints, the sore back, they all disappeared as well. So I can see that.
Yeah, and no post-workout, the DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness. I didn't get any of that. And I was just like, and that's why I did that crazy workout, because I was like, am I just not pushing myself hard enough? Like, what's going on? But sure enough, I couldn't get sore. And so I was like, at that point, I'm like, right, it's time to go play some rugby. I'm going to go smash someone. Went back out and felt great. Was back out training. I had been in Bangladesh doing humanitarian work for months. I was completely out of shape, hadn't played a full season in 3 years. And I just went back and was playing with my professional team in Seattle that just turned professional, Seattle Seawolves and Saracens. That's the former name. And so I was feeling great. 2 days after that, I'm just like, my legs are not sore. I've just done crazy amounts of workouts, and my legs are not sore. Met a friend for coffee, and I had 1 cup of black coffee, and within 20 minutes, I could feel my hamstrings and backs stiffening up and tightening up. Oh, okay, what's happening?
Yeah,
what's happening? And I was sore for 2 days after that. So for me, coffee's not worth it.
Yeah.
Right.
But I guess that's anecdotal, but it's
me.
Yeah.
But it's my experience, right? And so for me, that wasn't worth it. Now, you having it, you're obviously happy with the benefits it's giving you.
Yeah.
And a bit of sore. I did 32 sets of squats, right? No one's doing that, right? And I was stiff, but it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like, it wasn't what it should have been. For that ridiculous amount of work that I had put in. I should have been crippled for a month. And I've done not even half of that sort of workout, probably a third of that sort of workout. In, at the end of a season when my legs are really strong and fit, and I was absolutely crippled for 2 weeks after that. Like it was like absolute torture to go up and down stairs. And that was when I was in college and I lived on the second floor. It was just dreadful to do that. And so I was figuring like, oh my God, I've just done that to myself again. Nothing. It was nothing.
Wow.
1 cup of coffee, I was sore and stiff, but it didn't stop me from doing anything. Wow. Right. So, if no one's doing that amount of ridiculous like work, they're not going to get even that sore. So a bit sore, having some coffee, probably not that big a deal. To me, it was, and I at least noticed that, look, that's doing something to me. That's causing inflammation. That's doing something. I don't want any of that.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm saying you have to do this, that, and the other. I just don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't want to put things in my body that aren't good for my body. As well, that whole, my body's a temple sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like just putting what's in there what needs to be in there. To your, going back to your Patreon question, I have absolutely seen anecdotally people improve their back health and the symptoms of nerve compression, which is probably what he's talking about there.
Yep.
He's got a couple of disc bulges. The problem with those disc bulges is that they can squish on your nerves that are sort of releasing out from your spine, and they can cause pain shooting down your legs. And that can be very painful, very debilitating. And the surgery for that is to go down there and sort of, pick off some of that. It's called a microdiscectomy, or depending on what's going on, but you just take a bit of that disc material away and you free up that nerve. Right. And that's very helpful. You hit your funny bone, it's going to cause problems. Yeah. Or if you're constantly pushing on your funny bone, right, it's your ulnar nerve, and that's going to be a problem. So that's what's happening in some people's backs, and that's a problem. So that's why you surgically decompress. You can actually surgically decompress that, or carpal tunnel, right? So you decompress that nerve, and then that goes away, and the nerve can just sort of calm down again. So that's the idea with the back as well. But I have absolutely seen people not have to have surgery and improve their symptoms by changing their diet, just going on a keto diet and reducing the amount of garbage that they're eating, reducing all the seed oils, and reducing the sugar and the carbs, especially raising their ketones. Their body heals a bit better. And with carnivore as well. I have also seen people, and again, this is all anecdotal, because like I said, we don't have this in the literature, but it's something that Dr. Chaffee made me very interested in, and that might be interesting to try to sort of take disc material out of people that have been symptomatic and send this off and see, if we've seen the same things in the disc material as we were in, knee cartilage and things like that. And then we could really link this to diet, which I think we probably would find. But I've seen anecdotally people that have had these decompressions, taking off bone, taking off disc, and all these sorts of things, and the nerves are free and clear, right? And then it doesn't help their symptoms. They still have this horrible shooting pain. We do an MRI, it's free and clear. There's nothing to do there. Maybe they keep pushing it. Okay, well, let's go in, just look. There's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing there. There's nothing more we can do. They still have pain because it's just permanent nerve damage, right? And I have seen those people improve.
Yep.
I've seen people with, one gentleman, I have a video on, chronic pain and fibromyalgia on my YouTube channel. You look at the comments on that. There are hundreds of comments of people that have had this gentleman's problem or fibromyalgia and all these sorts of things. I've had these problems for 10 years. Nothing could help. I had the surgery. Nothing helped. I was on opiates for the last 12 years. And now, after a few months on a carnivore diet, I've been off opiates for the first time in over a decade. And you've given me my life back. I'm so happy. This is so great. Hundreds of those.
Yeah.
Right. So the plural of anecdote is data, and you've got 500 points of data there saying this helped me. So I have no study for this gentleman. Unfortunately, there are studies with like knee arthritis and things like that. Unfortunately, we don't have any in for his condition in the spine. However, it's going to help you in 1,000 other ways, for sure. It's going to reduce inflammation, for sure. And it could quite possibly help with your symptoms. I can't say for sure.
Yeah.
But it's worth a shot anyway.
I don't know how you guys are going. Toilet break, are you guys all good?
I'm all right. Yeah.
I'm good.
You're good. Sweet. I'm fine as well now. Then I snuck off before. We have a couple more questions. So Scotty Jenkin, who became a patron at Up and Joke tour actually while we were there. That was kind of funny on the beers. Anyway, g'day lads. I'd like to know his thoughts on this lab grown meat. That the mainstream news outlets, especially in America, are talking up as a better alternative to farm meat. He calls bullshit, and he thanks for the great content, fellas. But what are your thoughts on the farm-grown meat?
Yeah, I mean...
lab-grown meat.
Yeah, very, very similar sentiments to that gentleman. Yeah, so, first of all, this is not what we're really being sold that it is, right? We're saying, oh, we just make this in the lab, we just get some cells, and all this magic happens and stuff like that. No, actually what they have to do is they still need cows and they inseminate them. As the vegans would say, they rape them, right? And then they abort them and they kill the fetus and then they use those fetal aborted cells as the starter material for this lab-grown meat. Yeah, so you're not getting cows out of the equation.
Yeah, right.
You need the cows because you need the aborted fetuses. Why don't you just let it grow up and eat some damn grass and and have an actual life?
Do you feel better if you kill it like that far back?
Yeah.
I don't know. But the thing is, most people don't know that.
But that's the issue with.
I had no idea.
Yeah, well, I had no idea about that either. But that's the issue with a lot of vegan arguments, and I am empathetic to the vegan plight in compassion and obviously having animals live in conditions a lot better than what they are in some places. But the monocropping agriculture and that it causes so much more death. And just as much. And I understand that they're suggesting that, well, we're not intentionally going out to kill, but you know this. You're going in eating these vegetables knowing that there's 25 times the amount of
sentient animals die for every 1 kilogram of plant-based protein versus animal-based protein if you're eating large animals like a cow.
Wow.
Right? And so, I mean, like we said, right? So 1 cow, adult cow, would feed one of us as an individual for at least a year, if not 2 years, right? And probably a couple of years for a full-grown cow. And, you have to kill something like 100 field mice or something like that per hectare of grain or something like that, right? So you're killing at least 100 of those. 670 million birds are poisoned every year just in America with the crop pesticides and insecticides and fertilizers and things like that, which then wash off, get in the groundwater, get in the streams and rivers and choke out and kill a bunch of other animals as well. They kill trillions of insects, billions of bees, and those insects are now not at the base of the food chain for birds and other insects and other lizards and things like that to then eat and then propagate. So 670 million, according to an article I read, something like 670 million birds are poisoned every year. About 10% of those die. So like 67 million birds die every year. And they say it's very hard to calculate, if it's more than that because of the wide, reach of these things.
They fly into the city and die on the fucking pavement.
Yeah. Or because there just weren't 30 trillion extra bugs that year. Then you just can't support as many birds as well, and so that's a problem also. But also, you get kangaroos and deer and hog going in to eat those crops and everything like that. Like an elk or a moose or something that can come in and just ravage your grain supply.
Yeah.
Right. And so you got to kill them.
Yep.
So farmers kill them. They hire snipers that shoot these things, and then those animals go to waste. They don't even get to eat them because who needs 1,000 pounds of meat at 2 a.m?
And
so if they're not
obviously
eating it,
a lot of these crops are sort of grown for the animal consumption as well. So I guess there's a bit of spillover,
not
but
as much as you think.
I do know it's not as, but it obviously would play a factor in with the spillover, but
about that much.
It's not that much.
About that much.
Right.
Yeah, right.
93% of the plants that animals eat are not consumable by humans.
Okay.
It's the hay. It's not the grain, right? So we're not giving them necessarily like corn and soy crops.
Oh, wow.
Giving them the plants that they came from, which would then have to be burned and cleared for the next year's crops.
And we're taking the consumable part for the humans as
so
well.
we take the consumable part, and then the leftover fiber we can't use, right? And so, in fact, remember back when they were saying, the rainforest in Amazon is burning and no one's talking about it, which was a huge distraction. That was the distraction. People weren't distracting away from the Amazon. They used that as a distraction for whatever the hell else was going on. God knows at this point. But that's my opinion anyway. And the reason I say that is because they were saying that it's like, the Amazon's burning, all these sorts of things. It wasn't the Amazon rainforest that was burning. Amazon is it's like a state, like WA, right? And there were a lot of fires that year, right? But they weren't wildfires. They were controlled fires on farms, burning down the chaff and excess growth because they harvested what they wanted. They had all this crap in the way, so they had to burn it because normally you could let animals come in and eat that, or you could sell that to animals. There's not enough animals, right? So they have to burn it off to make way for the next year's crop. And NASA actually published an article on this on their website. They hence had to change it, probably from political pressures. They said that actually these are all normal. These are all from farms, and they're actually below average for this year. And they had to change that. They had to change out the below average part. They actually changed that. It was just like, and so they were all controlled things, and they're burning out fires. So if you don't have enough animals, then you don't have enough animals to eat down the dead grasses and things like that, or the older grasses. You need to eat them down so that they can actually start improving their life cycle and also be low enough that the new grasses can grow up. So
that's what I had read, that the amount of methane, so we're going down that climate change path, the methane that a cow produces in regards to the gases and whatnot, is the same as if you let that same grass rot and then go to the soil, will then turn into the same amount of methane. So there's you're not by stopping this farming and agriculture of cattle isn't going to make a difference in regards to the methane expenditure, I guess.
Yeah, so it depends on what sort of pathway it goes down. But yeah, so if the bacteria get to it in different sorts of areas, it'll break down that fiber and it will turn into methane and things like that. And that's something that people don't understand, is that we're talking about greenhouse emissions and gases and things like that, that all the anthropogenic emissions that we have, like all of the cattle and industries and coal and all that sort of stuff, produces a very, very a large amount of CO2 and all that sort of stuff. However, it's less than all the greenhouse gases and things like that are produced from volcanoes every year.
Yeah.
So everything we're doing doesn't meet what volcanoes are doing every year.
Pardon the pun.
And what the volcanoes are doing isn't as much as all like the plant material that's just sort of degrading and decaying and just decaying into sort of throughout its life cycle, right? So they die and they decay and so on. That's creating way more CO2 and all these other gases than even the volcanoes, which is more than we're even putting out as well. And then all of that accounts for about 5%.
Wow.
Of what's being put out, because the oceans actually put out about 95%. And this has to do with the temperature about 700 years ago. And this is something that Al Gore actually spoke about in his lecture series and stuff like that on, the Inconvenient Truth sort of thing. But he didn't tell you the whole story, because he said, look, the CO2 going up and down has to do with the temperature going up and down and up and down and up and down. You look at this throughout, thousands of years, eons and millions of years, and all these sorts of things based on the core samples, ice samples. And it's just like going up and down, and he's like, almost as if this is related. So funny. But what he doesn't tell you, he's looking at this on a geological scale, right? Over like hundreds of thousands, millions of years.
Yeah.
Right. And so what he doesn't show you is that if you look down and magnify that a bit, there's actually about a 700-year gap.
Yeah, right.
Heat comes first.
Wow.
So the temperature goes up, and then 700 years later, CO2 goes up.
This is sort of what McCann said last week he had read that similar data. That's interesting.
Well, there's professors from Harvard and MIT and things like that, and in oceanography and stuff like that, who are talking about this. And this is just what it is, you know. And so, you know, when it takes centuries to heat up an ocean,
so almost like that's the trend.
It is, and that's exactly what Al Gore showed, and that's what when actual climate scientists and oceanologists and things like that have shown, this is what's going on. And so the heat goes up first. It takes hundreds of years to bring up the heat of an ocean, and as the heat of the ocean goes up, it starts releasing more CO2.
Wow!
And when it cools down, it starts sequestering and pulling it in.
Is the CO2 from the evaporation on the water? What?
Yeah, so it's there's a lot of CO2 basically dissolved in the oceans. That's like the biggest one of the biggest reservoirs of CO2 is in the ocean. So it can hold different amounts of CO2, you know, based on if it's hot or cold and things like that. And so it once the temperatures change, it's going to release or suck in more CO2. And so what they found is that as the temperatures go up, it starts releasing more CO2. So but it's not them releasing CO2 that then causes the heat to go up. It's the other way around.
So you could suggest that the climate change is a real thing, but not potentially human caused or
human driven.
Not that we should be pushing against, you know, like I'm all for not polluting and having green energy and as clean.
And that's a very different thing, though. You know, I mean, not polluting, but you know, Obama tried to make CO2 a pollutant, like legally classified as a pollutant. It's like, okay, all of us are polluting right now by breathing out, right? So I mean that was obviously a bit absurd. And you know, in biology, at least when I was going through, CO2 is called the gas of life, because that's what plants breathe. They need to bring this in and then combine that with, you know, energy from the sun to make glucose, right? This is where all energy and life comes from, is a combination of CO2 and sunlight. Well, most life. There are some little things way down by volcanic flows at the bottom of the ocean and things like that. But, you know, by and large, this is where the energy from the sun is transposed into living energy, and CO2 is important for that. It's the only thing that will drive that. You need it there. So the more CO2 you have, actually, the more life you can support on Earth. We're carbon-based life forms, right? There are non-carbon-based life forms, but the vast majority are carbon-based life forms, right? So, you know, saying that, there's carbon pollution, all that sort of stuff is like, well, no, actually, that just means there's more life. There's more potential. There's more, you know, carbon available for life. There's more CO2 available for more plant material. And this is actually, I saw a talk by, you know, climate scientist, and he was actually showing that the Sahara Desert was green from space for the first time in history, right?
Now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's not like it's not like jungle green.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you know, it's that's a man-made desert. You know, the Middle East are man-made deserts as well. Those were, I mean, you read Gilgamesh, it's the oldest written story. It takes place in, you know, Mesopotamia or Babylon-ish areas, Iraq, modern day Iraq. And they were talking, it sounded like, you know, the Great Plains in America or something like that, like deer and antelope and grass and cedar forests and all these sorts of things. It's all great. That's all, you know, very barren now. That's where they started agriculture, you know, in Samaria. You know, they started cropping. Yeah. Sort of, that's one of the earliest versions. It sort of spread from there.
Is that the Epic of Gilgamesh? Or
Yeah. Yeah. And then that was down in Egypt. They're obviously doing a lot of farming. That's sort of all deserty. And then, you know, the Sahara Desert. But we have infrared images from space actually show there's actually human settlements, whereas now the Sahara Desert. So there were actually people and cities and all these sort of stuff all throughout there. And then this desert sort of just encroached and covered all of it. In the 90s, I remember seeing as a kid, there was, they did soil samples underneath the Sphinx and the pyramids. There's like, okay, were they always desert people and all these sorts of things? I was like, how the hell did they move these big blocks and all these sorts of things? Like, there's no trees and forests and everything like that to like roll big things on logs or whatever. And they were like, was this always desert? And they found, well, no, actually, the soil sample and material that we got from underneath there actually looked like this is something we would typically see in jungles.
Yeah,
so
right.
These are jungle people. These are jungle pyramids. jungle sphinx, you know,
Yep.
and that was Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world, right? And so and I remember learning this as a kid, was that when you they were able to do this because every year the Nile River would flood and all this silt and nutrients would go and spread and replenish the soil. Well, what does that mean? That means that you're stripping out nutrients and it's going away, like we're doing with monocropping, where I have to dump in all these chemical, generally petroleum-based fertilizers, which is also why the big oil and things like that trying to push the whole lab meat, all that sort of crap. I don't know exactly how they're invested, but they have a vested interest in, the less animals there are, the less natural fertilizers there are, the more petroleum-based fertilizers they sell. Yeah. So at the Nile, they didn't need that. It just flooded every year. Okay. So that means it needed to flood every year. It needed to replenish every year, right? Even in the Bible, it says only, plant crops for, 6 years. On the 7th year, let it rest, let the animals come in and do all this sort of stuff. And then you can go back and plant again.
It's like ancient wisdom had its place, eh?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so not everybody had a Nile River that flooded every year, but they're like growing crops and things like that. And they're turning these things into wastelands, right? And they're turning into deserts and desertification, right? You don't have animals coming through on this. You're just stripping nutrients out and you're not putting any back in, right? And, so I think that is likely what caused these deserts to form was actually agriculture, not animals. In fact, people like Alan Savory, who, was a traditionally trained sort of person and thought, animals make deserts. And then he sort of realized, no, this is the other way around. When we get animals out of an area, then they turn into deserts.
Yep.
Right. And so he takes large herds of animals, bunched and moving like a herd of migrating animals. And they're just sort of eating as they move, but their hooves are sort of digging into the ground, making little, divots and patches. So the rain comes, it doesn't just wash everything off. It sort of pools and sinks down. So you're getting more groundwater. The seeds are actually getting into the soil and planting as opposed to just being wiped away. And they're eating down the plants, but not too much because they're defecating and urinating on their own food supply. So they have to keep moving, moving.
Is that the idea of, is it permaculture, I think, where you're sort of living in almost in harmony with the natural environment and using the animals, the natural water supplies and I guess working in conjunction with nature instead of moving nature to suit your needs. I think that's what permaculture is.
Probably. I don't know the term exactly, but it sounds right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And so he's doing that and he's showing that you can actually reverse deserts.
Yeah, I did read about that.
Yeah.
Like, that they were saying that would have more effect than any other thing.
Yeah.
Compared to CO2.
Yeah.
Or to lower the amounts of CO2.
Wow. I've also, and I think it's Graham Hancock was talking about that similar thing where there's erosion on the rain on this from heavy rainfall on the Sphinx that probably dates it back later than they originally thought. But it does suggest that it was also a jungle territory, which I think we sort of already knew that anyway. But all right, another question.
Just brief one on that one for that last question. I just want to make sure he gets his money worth. Yeah, I don't think that lab grown meat is a good idea. You still have to have cows. It's not the solution that everyone is touting it to be, but also it's not scalable. And this is coming from the people that do this. So the people that some of the main guys that are actually making this lab grown meat, it looks like a brewery. These big brewery tank sort of things, and they're cultivating all these cell cultures in there. It is, this is living tissue, right? I mean, just like one little bacteria gets in there, boom, gone. You've lost a whole batch. And so they are saying, not me, they are saying that this is not scalable, that you are never going to be able to scale this up to meet the population demands.
Just financially. It must be like, we're already in a cost of living crisis, like around the world. Like, imagine,
and I think that's probably why they're jacking up the prices of meat and trying to put taxes and this and that's, because lab grown meat is about twice as much as normal meat, like hamburger meat. It's just way more expensive to do this stuff, and so I think that they're probably they're probably heavily invested in this stuff too, the politicians. So now they're taxing this stuff to make it more expensive to just get normal meat. So then it's just like, whatever.
Yeah.
And so but it's not scalable. You cannot do this in a production volume that is there's ever going to not. First of all, you still need animals because you got to rape them and abort them. As the vegans would say, right? You're going to still need to use animals, right? That's not going to get rid of them altogether. Also, you don't want to because it destroys the environment, because the environment is plants and animals living together in symbiosis, right? And you take one of those out, you get deserts, right? You take the animals away, the plants die. You take the plants away, animals don't have anything to eat, they die, right? You need both, right? And but yeah, it's not scalable. That's the long and short of it. This is not something that is going to be a viable long-term solution, because from the horse's mouth, this is not something that's ever going to be able to meet the demand of people.
Final question from our Patreons. Hey guys, been a carnivore for 7 months. Haven't regretted the transition. My wife has been carnivore for about 18 months. She still craves a lot of fat. She predominantly eats pork belly and bacon. She does eat beef, but not as much. I've heard you say that red meat is the most nutritional meat. Should she try and include more red meat, or is it okay to eat that much fatty pork if it's what she craves? She has pretty much cleared all of her gut issues and lost weight.
Great. When
she started carnivore. She having had put on a fair bit of weight from a hysterectomy. So it's more about whether it's okay to eat like that long term, or will it cause deficiencies? Lastly, this is a long question, Ron. Lastly, the fat craving, is that a hormonal thing? I can't eat anywhere near as much fat as his wife. Thank you, Dr. Chaffee.
Yeah. Well, the craving thing is just what your body needs, right? So her body is obviously telling her that it needs, more than his, and that's fine. We're all sort of individual. I think you're going to find that some people need more fat than others, and others need a bit more protein, depending on how active they are, men, women, fertile, or maybe they've conceived and they're growing a baby. You're going to have all different sorts of demands. So I think that it's important to eat what your body's asking you to eat, because if you're eating what you're supposed to eat, you should be able to listen to those hunger signals. And if fat is tasting really good and you're just like, oh, I really want that, your body's asking you for it, and I think you should give that. So that's okay that she's eating a different amount than he is. So that's fine. It's just her body telling her that. As far as eating red meat or a lot of pork, I think it's it's all relative, right? It's always compared to what, right? Compared to eating anything else, yeah, pork's fantastic, right? Compared to eating red meat, I think red meat's better. Even grain finished red meat. And I think a lot of that has to do with what the pig is being fed, or the chicken's being fed, and what the cow's being fed. But ruminant animals are really good at breaking down even things that they're not used to eating, right? There was a study that recently just came up that I just saw someone sort of write a post about it, so I just saw it in periphery. But it said that ruminant animals, because of their ruminant and how robust it is to break down and digest things, it can break down glyphosate. They don't even absorb glyphosate. So they're like, oh, well, these animals are being given, Roundup sprayed plants, and obviously we don't want that. Oh, but the animals are getting it too, so you can't avoid it. Well, it seems that you can with red meat.
Yep.
It seems that the ruminant animals actually are able to break it down from that article. But, I haven't read the whole thing and to know
I think
how it is.
Peterson just kind of said the same thing, just anecdotally, his family, just cows, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he was saying because of the extra stomachs, everything else is broken out. But
yeah, well, if you certainly have autoimmune issues or other sorts of health issues,
yeah, I think that's
you can get much more sensitive to even to things in meat. And again, that's coming from what the animal's eating and not being able to break down that as successfully as, say, a ruminant animal would, or the things that they're designed to eat, right? Because they are designed to eat certain things, and if they're eating those things, they're not going to get a bunch of toxic stuff in their body either. That's not going to transpose to us. And Michaela Peterson and Jordan Peterson, they really have to stick to red meat. A lot of people with autoimmune issues have to stick to red meat because some of those things are just getting through the pig or the chicken and are flaring up their autoimmunity. And obviously that's not what you want, but red meat seems to do just fine and even grain finished. I think Michaela was saying once, I saw a quick video of hers, that she was saying that she actually prefers grain finished, or she likes that. Just from a taste perspective, but either way, it's not giving her rheumatoid arthritis flare-ups, and she was a very sensitive case for that. She had 2 major joint replacements. I think by the time she was 16, so majorly aggressive case. So if your wife's doing fine, then just keep eating what you're eating. It's totally fine. It is going to have more of some of the crap. Also, pig fat, chicken fat, things like that, when they're being fed a bunch of soy and corn and things like that, they're getting those seed oils, those plant oils, that linoleic acid, the omega-6s that you really don't want.
Okay.
And really not good for you. And
they're not breaking it down.
No, they're just storing it. So that's getting into their fat as well.
Okay.
So farmed, feedlot chickens and pigs and things like that, farm raised fish.
So it's not incredible.
They have high linoleic acid and they have high omega-6s. So it's not ideal.
Because that was something that we were pushed back on a fair bit when you were saying the vegetables were killing us, and that viral clip went pretty bonkers. But a lot of people were saying, it's not the plants, it's they're being sprayed with. No. And I would contest, obviously, that what they're being sprayed with isn't great either. No, but I mean, is that another huge factor? Because you sort of can't avoid it, really, can you?
No, it's very difficult. I mean, if you have your own vegetable patch, then you can control what gets sprayed on that, and that's great. But no, the plants themselves are what are harmful. It's I grew up looking at this and everyone saying, oh yeah, well, people put this and people put that, and I was just like, everything bad on earth is not just man-made. There are other things out there, and 99.99% of plants in the world are inedible. Meaning that they are so toxic that even a small amount of them will kill you or make you extraordinarily sick. You have a few undercooked beans laid you out, right? And those are so-called edible, right? And they were still extremely toxic if they weren't prepared properly, right? So no, it's the plant themselves that are harmful, right? So people can do a thought experiment. You get lost in the woods, you run out of food. Can you eat any random plant? No, right? Most of them will make you very sick or even kill you. You have to know what's safe to eat, right? What's palatable, what you can survive on, because that's what it is. It's survival, right? And then you can get real food. But there was experiments done out of UC Berkeley in 1989, published by Professor Bruce Ames, and he showed that there are 10,000 times more naturally occurring pesticides and insecticides in the plant that they make to stop animals and insects from eating them, because that's their main defense. Plants defend themselves by being poisonous, among other things, but that's a major defense, is by being poisonous. Anyone can open up a botany textbook on this and you will see this right away, right? And so he found, and he only found, I think it was like 42 different toxins that he identified, 20 of which were shown to be carcinogenic in the lab. When I was taking cancer biology 12 years later, there was already 136 carcinogens just identified just in Brussels sprouts. And he looked at 42 in like all the different sorts of plants that we were eating, right? And he found that of those 42 that he knew about, that they outweighed the pesticides that we sprayed on them by a factor of 10,000.
Yeah, right.
So he found that 99.99% of the pesticides, insecticides, and toxins were inherent in the plant, and he only knew about 42 of them. We know about a lot more now, and so if you add those to the mix, it's likely a lot more than 10,000, a lot more than 99.99. And he found that mushrooms were in lab experiments. Obviously, we don't know how this translates to people, but in lab experiments, that the mushrooms that you eat with an equivalent amount of pesticides that have been sprayed on those mushrooms, the mushrooms themselves were 500 times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides, right?
Wow. Which mushrooms were these? Were they
just normal white mushrooms?
Wow.
Yeah, not like anything fun or exciting.
Yeah.
And
wow.
So that's the thing. So when people say, no, it's what we spray on it. Look, what we spray on it's not great. I mean, that's why we spray it on it, right? It's an insecticide. It's to kill animals and insects trying to eat it, trying to eat our crop.
Yeah.
Right? But the majority of animals and insects already can't eat that crop, right? Because, we don't die from eating spinach, but we get very sick eating eucalyptus.
Yep.
Koalas don't get sick eating eucalyptus. They would probably get sick eating spinach, right? They don't have those defenses, right? So different plants make a battery of different defenses to stop animals from eating them. Some have evolved their evolutionary niche. They've evolved the ability to break down, detoxify, and circumvent those defenses, and maybe be able to release the nutrients that that the plant has that it's trying to sequester. So they built up enzymes that can break down those bonds, and they can get nutrients. They can get complete nutrition, and they can sidestep and circumvent the toxins and things like that, and the defensive mechanism, so that they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. Okay. But not every animal can do that for every plant, right? In fact, most plants will kill most animals, right? And so wheat or corn or all these sorts of things, they have defenses to most bugs.
Yep.
Right? But they don't have defenses to all bugs. So some bugs can still eat those. And that's why that's what you spread pesticides and things like that on for. And this is where GMOs are from, right? So, let's say there's, certain bugs are able to eat wheat, but they're not able to eat corn. And the reason they're not able to eat corn is because there's this protein in there that will kill that bug, right? So they take the gene that codes for that protein out of the corn, they put it in the wheat, and now that bug can't eat wheat. Now you get better crop yields, right? And so people are just like, oh my God, these GMOs, they're making them more poisonous, they're more worse. Yeah, that's the entire point. That plants use these chemicals and toxins, but they're not making these things up. This is not a new mechanism. That just like never came out before, that plants just never defended themselves with chemical, by chemical means. Just taking one and putting it into another. So yes, it is technically more toxic. It was already really toxic.
Yeah. So if you ate both anyway, you'd be doing the same
thing.
Yeah,
you're eating corn and wheat. It's basically saying maybe you're getting a bit more or something like that. Maybe that protein's a bit better or worse than other things, but you're talking about eating something that inherently has a lot of toxins.
And what about the push against that, saying, well, yeah, you're saying there's carcinogens within and some of these defense chemicals within vegetables, but there's also carcinogens in red meat. Like, have we developed tolerance to them, or have we adapted to absorb them over the years, or what's the argument against or is it a myth that there's carcinogens in red meat?
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah. So
it is a myth?
Yeah, absolutely. So or
is it processed meats, what the carcinogens are in, or
so that again goes back to our friends the Seventh-day Adventists who have infiltrated the WHO, and they were on that panel in 2015 that said that processed meats were a carcinogen, a class 1 carcinogen.
Yeah,
below grade. I mean, class 1 doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean you're all exactly the same. So this is the things like what the health fraudulently, knowingly misled people by saying that processed meat was just as bad as cigarettes and plutonium. Bit ridiculous because, are cigarettes as bad as plutonium? Did any idiot knows that that's not true?
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So then that's, so even if processed meat were as bad as cigarettes, they're certainly not as bad as plutonium. Right. So you already know that that they're, playing games, but they knew what they were doing. This is their get out of jail free card, was that they put a number that was right next to it. That was sort of their relative risk increase of developing cancer, or estimated. You don't know what it is. It's just a random ass number that's on there, but it's on this list. Oh, class 1 carcinogens, processed meat, 6 over here, and cigarettes, 314,000, and then plutonium, 8.6 million. It's like, so not really the same.
Yeah.
And there's like, oh yeah, so you're giving kids processed meat. That's just like giving them cigarettes for breakfast. I'm like, yeah, not exactly.
Wow.
Like giving them one cigarette would be like giving them 35,000 servings of processed meat, if we can go by those numbers there. But we can't, because those were put forward by the WHO. And this is something that other people who were on that board that were coming up saying, okay, which studies are we going to look at and what are we going to put forward and what our recommendation is going to be. There are people that looked at that and have since come out and said one guy said that was the most difficult thing that he's ever experienced in his professional career, because he saw countless high level, very good studies that said There's no sort of cancer risk, no sort of health risks at all from meat or processed meat that were just thrown out and ignored. And then really low level, crappy, horrible studies that were included because they fit that narrative, right? And they sort of very slight increased association, and it was garbage. And so they said, they challenged these other guys saying, hey, look, you guys are clearly biased. You guys, you know, a lot of you guys are vegetarians, vegans, or Seventh-day Adventists, right? You need to declare your biases. You have a particular bias. You are saying you just eat plants and this, that, and the other, and you're religiously only eating plants. Like, you need to say that. You need to disclose your biases. They refused.
Wow.
And they said that, and they couldn't even say that red meat was a carcinogen. They say it was probably a carcinogen, right?
That's good science.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Or likely carcinogen, right? But then you look at their other website, on the WHO's website, and I put this on my YouTube video, Plants Are Trying to Kill You, and a lot of other videos as well. It's a link to the WHO website where we talk about natural plant toxins or natural food toxins, right? And so they don't just say these are plant toxins, but this is just food toxins. These are toxins that show up in food. Every single damn one of them is like a plant or an algae, right? So none of them are from meat, right? So there's not a single chemical or this, that, and the other that they can say this is toxic that exists in meat.
Wow.
None. And WHO, I mean, they've got a bias against meat. Still couldn't come up with one. Not a single damn one. All these things. One that you'd see like, like different algae, toxic algae and things like that, like, you know, mollusks and fish would sort of eat and absorb and things like that. And then we would eat that and we could get poisoned by that. It's like, you know, red tide or something like that, you know, so you wouldn't want to eat that animal, but that's not the animal being poisonous. That's the algae that's in its environment that's gotten into the meat and things like that. That's different. But then, you know, it goes into oxalates and phytic acid and saponins and solanines and, you know, toxic mushrooms and furanocoumarins and all these other things that only exist in plants. Talking about, you know, the cyanide, you know, cyanogenic glycosides and things like that. 2,500 different plants that have cyanide, and like cassava, which is a very important food staple in the tropics. It's the number 3 most important calorie source in the tropics, cassava root. And 500 million people around the world subsist on cassava root as their primary calorie source, right? There's bitter cassava and sweet cassava. Bitter cassava has so much cyanide that it will kill you, right? If you eat even small amounts of it, I don't know exactly how much, but it's deadly. So they have to chemically process it and treat it and do all these sorts of things. If you have to chemically process something and treat it and do all these sorts of things, obviously we're not designed either, right? Because we should be able to have all those chemical processes ourselves, just like a koala or a wallaby or something like that, right? They're designed to eat those plants, so they don't have to like cook it and prepare it and do it. Well, you have to cook meat. No, you don't. You can eat raw meat. We've been doing it for a long time, but we've also been cooking meat for 800,000 years at least.
Wow.
Right? And so people say, well, you know, cooking meat, getting all these charred particles and things like that. Well, the studies that they looked at that said those charred particles and things like that were carcinogenic. First of all, are not from meat. That's from doing something to meat.
Yep.
Right? So just don't burn it. You know, that's easy. And, you know, but also those were done in animals, and they were done at levels that were thousands of times higher than you would get in cooking. Right.
Yeah,
so how translatable is that to someone eating, you know, a grilled steak or something like that? Probably not very. Right. Yeah. We've been cooking meat for at least 800,000 years. Some people think, you know, upwards of 1.5 million years or more. But it's, you know, we have good evidence that's at least 800,000 years. So Homo sapiens came onto the scene about 300,000 years ago. So we've been cooking meat. Our ancestors have been cooking meat 500,000 years before we ever even existed. Yeah. Right? Before our species even existed. Whatever happens when we cook meat, I'm sure we're pretty well used to at this point. Right? And so the whole idea that meat and red meat contains or is carcinogenic, total garbage. And also from the cooking side of things or whatever, maybe you could do something to this. I think we're more than adapted to it. But if you're worried about it, just, boil it, eat it raw, whatever. It doesn't matter. 98.5% of food poisoning cases in America are from produce, from plants and spinach and lettuce and things like that. And the ones that have to do with meat, it's not just from meat. It's from somebody handling meat who didn't wash their hands.
Yeah.
And so it's never really the meat. The USDA is very careful about this, and other Western countries are as well. They have someone there on the plant as they're processing meat, and you have about 6 in America. The USDA, from what I was talking to, meat manufacturer said they have a guy sitting there 24 hours a day. That's his office right there, and 6 hours a day they get to process. And then for 2 hours, they have to do a deep clean, pressure wash, bleach all the surfaces, everything like that. Dude from the USDA goes in, starts spot checking, finds any contamination, they have to do another 2-hour deep clean, right? So it's an 8-hour cycle. So you can do 3 cycles in 24 hours. And when they're processing, they are processing for 24 hours around the clock. And then they take samples from that processing thing. They send those off to the lab. They incubate them and try to culture something. If they find anything, they pull that whole batch back. Right, it's very carefully controlled and regulated to make sure that we don't get contamination in our meat. Yeah. So meat's very safe. And so as long as you're careful about this and you're in a Western country and doing these sorts of things, you don't necessarily have to, you certainly don't have to cook it to burn and everything like that. So you don't have to cause those carcinogens, which I think we were more than adapted for already. University of Washington in Seattle, where I'm from, they published a major paper last year showing, looking at hundreds of different studies. And they found that the ones that were suggesting that meat was bad and red meat was bad or carcinogenic or whatever, they said that they were lazy studies, very poorly designed, extremely biased. And they absolutely did not in any way, shape, or form show any sort of link to cancer or any sort of health ramification. And he said, and especially for unprocessed red meat. Yep. And I said that was complete garbage. Yeah. And so, meat has been vilified, but it's been vilified by Kellogg's and by Sanitarium, by the Seventh-day Adventists, by Coca-Cola, by the sugar companies, by the food industries for literally a century, at a commercial level. And before that, by the Seventh-day Adventists, into the 1800s, early 1800s even, they were pushing this crap by other people. But, meat has been just vilified and vilified and vilified and vilified and vilified. And I think most of it is ideologically driven or financially driven. The sugar companies originally in the 50s and 60s, there was evidence showing that sugar, actually, as we increase the amount of processed and refined sugar that we were eating, levels of heart disease come up. Same thing with seed oils and plant oils. And in fact, you look in the 1800s, we're eating a lot more meat in the early 1800s than we are even now, and certainly throughout the 1900s. And that sort of came down a bit. And actually around the turn of the century, sort of early 1900s, it sort of troughed. And so we were eating in America the lowest amount of meat in about the 1920s and 1930s. That was the lowest point. It's sort of this sort of U-shaped curve. It started coming up again after that, but it was coming down in the 1800s, and then really dipped at the lowest point was around the 1920s and 30s. Yeah, and that was the point that heart disease actually became the number one killer in America. Throughout the entire century, the 1800s, 120 years from the 1800 to 1920. We were eating tons and tons of meat, just no heart disease, right? In fact, William Osler, who's the first professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins, very famous medical teacher and instructor. I have actually one of his books that he wrote, my great-grandfather's book when he was a doctor. And he said that in his entire career, he had seen, I think it was 6 cases of angina, so like cardiac pain, not necessarily from blockages in the heart, but just that sort of pain. Yeah. And no heart attacks. Never seen any heart attacks. Weren't really any heart attacks even described in the literature in the 1800s. And we're eating all this meat. Yeah. Right. And then in like 1910 or somewhere around there in the 1910s, someone in America published the very first recorded autopsy of a myocardial infarction, of death from a heart attack, right? Mm-hmm. And it was because it was brand new, and people were looking at this. We've never seen that before. You're making it up. We don't believe you.
Yeah.
And you've just not seen something. Blood coagulates. Doesn't mean that there's a clot there. Doesn't mean that blocked that off. All these sorts of things. So they didn't believe him. And they didn't believe this happened. 10 years later, it took 10 years before they started actually thinking like, oh, okay, well, maybe he did see what he saw, because there were more and more and more coming.
Yep.
10 years after that, it's the number one killer in America. At the lowest point in meat consumption in America in 200 years.
Wow.
Right? And so,
Is there an alternative reason given? Like
sugar? Seed oils.
Yep.
Processed foods, right? So Dr. Chris Kenobi wrote a book called Ancestral Diet Revolution. He's an ophthalmologist treating macular degeneration and a lot of other things for years. Went into nutritional research as well, decade or so ago, maybe 15 years ago. And he's been doing a ton of research on this. And he thinks it's much more to do with the seed oils and the plant oils. Okay. And he goes into the, linoleic acid and omega-6s and how this, and then the actual process for how it damages the body. He thinks it's other processed foods as well and sugar as well. But, as we've been increasing our sugar consumption as well, and Dr. Robert Lustig thinks it's really mostly to do with the fructose and the sugar and things like that, but processed food in general. But I think it's both. I think it's all of the above. It's a lot of just eating a bunch of plants and crap that we're not designed to eat. Whatever it is, whatever specific things it is, it's eating things that we're not designed to eat.
Yep.
And things are getting screwy. And so whatever's a major player there, jury's still out, but it's likely the seed oils and the sugar, fructose specifically. Mm. And so as that's going up, that had the disease prevalence has gone up. And he says specifically the omega-6 ratio in nature, humans that are eating different diets, even carnivore diets, heavy meat-based diets, or even like plant-based diets, the omega-6 levels that they get is usually about 1 to 2% of the fats that they get. Now we're getting like, some seed oils and things like that are like 70%.
Wow.
Omega-6s and linoleic acid and things like that. And so he thinks that's a major, major reason for that. And so both of those started coming up and up, sugar and seed oils, these industrial seed oils at the same time. And then you start seeing heart disease coming up as well. And, you're seeing that. And especially with sugar, people started noticing that relationship between increased refined sugar access and consumption and heart disease. And so there's a lot of studies getting pushed out like that in the 40s and 50s and things like that. You can go back to JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association. I've looked up a lot of these studies. It was hotly debated, hotly contested. And the sugar companies were pushing out through their proxies. They paid off like Ansel Keys and a number of other professors from Harvard and elsewhere that, fat's bad. Fat's really what's causing cholesterol. We're seeing cholesterol in the arteries. Therefore, it's from eating cholesterol, even though this has never existed ever before that. And we've been eating plenty of meat and fat. That was really a mainstay. Everyone knew that fat was really, really important for health and no heart disease. And so they were saying, well, what you should do is, again, you have a problem and I have the cure right here. I have the solution for you. So you shouldn't eat meat. You shouldn't eat fat. Because that could be bad for you. But let's say it's not bad for you, but it could be bad for you. So what do you got to lose? Just get rid of it. Just stop eating it. And you need calories, and so just eat sugar. Just replace it with sugar. Because that's just an empty calorie. It's just a calorie. Just gives you nutrition. Just gives you energy. And that'll be fine. And that was it. They're just pushing their product. And the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, published in 2016 actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in that era, detailing how they're paying off a number of different professors and things like that to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, and to exonerate sugar and say that it was safe. And in particular, there were 3 Harvard professors that they detailed by name that they had the contracts for. Ansel Keys wasn't at Harvard, but he was one of these jackasses as well, who also came up with the RDAs, right? So then going back to the RDAs, you're like, well, we know it's wrong on a number of different things like vitamin C and so on. And we know he was a fraud. So, I mean, well, I just don't, a single thing that guy's ever done, even though he's probably done a lot of good science to make the name for himself to then sell out like a piece of shit he is. I don't trust a single thing of it because the guy is eminently corrupt and corruptible. So I don't trust a thing that guy says. But, you know, in particular, these 3 Harvard professors, one of them was named head of the USDA. And he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol causes heart disease. Saturated fat increased cholesterol, stop eating both. And that's what changed the world, was that USDA declaration that changed everything in America. We reduced the amount of red meat because red meat's really bad. Eggs are really bad because they have a lot of cholesterol. So we replaced that with like leaner chicken and things like that, chicken breast. So we're eating a similar amount of meat, but we changed the kind of meat that we're eating. We're eating a lot less fat, a lot less cholesterol. Reduce the red meat by over a third. Reduce fat and cholesterol by over a third. Saturated fats and cholesterol by over a third. Increase fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively since the 1970s. And over tripled the amount of seed oils we're consuming. Over tripled the amount of high fructose corn syrup we're consuming. And what happened? Well, first of all, heart disease rates tripled, more than tripled. And some dishonest actors will try to tell you that, well, actually, death from heart disease peaked in sort of the 1960s, 70s, and then started coming down from there. So that's perfectly in line. We were reducing cholesterol, and that's going down. You always listen for weasel words, right? Always listen for words that sort of change what we're talking about. Because we're talking about the rate of heart disease. We're talking about heart disease being more common.
Yeah.
And they're saying death from heart disease peaked and then went down. Okay, well, first of all, medicine's improved. Our interventions have improved. You have a heart attack, you can get that clot pulled out. You can get TPA that can bust the clot and free up, so you don't have death from a stroke or death from a heart attack. And we can get early prevention, early treatment. Someone's going to go, oh, I can sort of feel that. We screen you, put you on a treadmill, and go, oh, I think you got some blockages. Put you in the cath lab, put in some stents. You never have a heart attack in the first place. However, even with all that, more people are still having a first-time heart attack than ever before. They're just not dying from it. And also, a lot of people reduced smoking. So we reduce smoking, which is a major contributor to heart disease. And that's actually improved the death rate. But also our interventions have as well. There are more people getting first heart attacks than before. The prevalence, the incidence, there are more people every year getting heart disease. There are more people as a burden on the society, as a body of the population that have heart disease now than previously. So there's 3 kinds of lies, as Mark Twain said: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And so that would be an example of a statistic that is a damn lie. Right. And so, that's someone who is intentionally trying to mislead you through ideology. They're trying to push a message. They want you to see what they think will manipulate you into thinking what they want you to think, but they damn well know that it's not true. And if they told you the whole truth, they know that people will go like, obvious. Well, yeah. And so they're doing that on purpose. So that's a bad actor who's doing that. So, that all comes back to the fact that all this stuff is tied up in money. All this stuff is tied up in industry from the beginning, with the Seventh-day Adventists, with processed foods, and vilifying meat, with saying that cholesterol was bad. There was a major killer. It is damn well not. It is every single cell in your body is made out of cholesterol. The cell membrane, which is like the bag that surrounds our cells, that is cholesterol, the majority of it, right? All of our hormones are made out of cholesterol. Our brains are like 20% cholesterol. These are important molecules. And we're vilifying these sorts of things. It's like, it's like saying that water is poison or something like that. Of course it's not. This is a very important part of our body and our structure and our health. And they're vilifying that because they're protecting their product, in that case, sugar. And then, later on, they're just, they're pushing these plant agriculture and plant crops and processed foods and things like that are extraordinarily profitable. And so they make a big markup on these things, and it's also really cheap. So this is why, butter is more expensive than Crisco and seed oils and things like that. So it's cheaper for a restaurant and an industry or whatever to use that. It's cheaper. They make more money using that cheaper, crappy product than something real. And so they benefit from that. And so then now they're and the Seventh-day Adventists, are infiltrated into just every board and body that discusses nutrition, because they came up with nutrition and nutritional sciences, and they're pushing that from their own agenda, but then the other places are pushing it from a financial agenda as well. And the thing in the way is always meat. That's that gets in the way. If you're buying steaks, you're not buying cereals, things like that, right? And so, and meat's bad, meat's evil, meat causes lust and sin and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of weird reasons why people don't like meat, but the studies that they're putting out are garbage, absolute garbage. They're verifiable garbage, and so you just have to be sort of aware of the counter arguments and the counter evidence.
Fuck, I think we didn't need another reason to hate the Seventh Day Advent.
Nah.
Yeah, but
Ape, mate, and rope.
Yeah, fuck. It's been 3.5 hours, so we'll call time-ish. But we're gonna have to get you back on again at some point.
So many questions.
That's been one of my favorite. That is my favorite episode that we've had so far. That's pretty eye-opening. There's some parts of that I thought I had a grasp on what was going on in some areas, but that's very eye-opening. But before we go, do you have anything to plug? Obviously, congratulations on the 100,000 YouTube subscribers. Was it 100,000? Did I see? Or
so I'm up at like 140 something now, which is cool. Yeah, that's going well.
Incredible. But anything to plug for the time being?
Oh, just my podcast is the Plant Free MD, and my YouTube channel is just Anthony Chaffee MD. Instagram is Anthony Chaffee MD. Twitter is Anthony_Chaffee, and that's sort of where you'll find everything. I try to make videos available for. I have a Patreon as well. Again, Anthony Chaffee MD, but I try to make everything available to people for free, because this isn't my job. I have a day job, and I like my day job. Yeah. But I think this is really important, because I think this is really important for people to understand and know about this, because so many people are just trying to do what's right, and they're trying to be healthy, and they're trying to live right. You were vegetarian for 6 years, and you thought that was the right thing to do. Yeah. So many people are doing that, and I don't care if people want to eat whatever the hell they want. I don't care if they smoke or drink or do whatever. I just don't want them to smoke and drink because they are being told by their doctors that they should. Yeah. I think that they just need, they think it's good for them. So they're doing something because they think it's good for them. So if you want to do it because you enjoy it, I mean, I'm all for that. I'm all for, personal expression and individual choices in adults. But I just want people to have the right information so that they can make an informed choice and decision. And so I try to make everything free and available to people, and through my YouTube channel, just so people can see. So that's what I would encourage people to go and check that out. If people are sort of interested in getting started or wanted to know some of the basics about it, I have a playlist called just Carnivore Essentials. I might change that to getting started on carnivore or something like that.
On your YouTube channel? On
my YouTube channel, and sort of curated different videos that I think help people get started and know what to do and how to do it, but also why we're doing it, because I think that's just as important. To be successful at something, you should understand why it's important in the first place to be doing this, and why it's good for you. Okay. And so because I have no interest in eating plants or anything like that, because I know exactly how bad they are for me, and I've seen the contrast and how I feel now, and how when I'm eating other things, or when they slip back in. I'll even eating like biltong or dry wurst, like the dried meat sticks, which are delicious. I love those things, but they have spices in them. Yeah. If I go a bit too crazy on that, I'll start getting more sore back and a bit sore muscle. And I'm like, okay, no, I gotta start actually eating just normal meat. Yeah.
I was very cautious of checking out when I'd go to a jerky shop, checking the ingredients.
Oh yeah.
I generally went with the ones that were curated with vinegar. Was it?
Yeah. And you don't want soy. No, those are no good. I mean, soy and sugars and all that. Usually there's a few places around Perth that have like South African sort of things, like the biltong and those sorts of things. Those are usually pretty clean. They use like vinegar. Yeah, but they have spices.
But it was good. They listed their ingredients for, I guess, people like me who were getting into it and were like, I want to avoid all the oils. I want to be as clean as possible. And it was, I can't remember the name of the place where I went, but it's bloody good.
The 7-day Adventists would hate the jerky, wouldn't they? Tying up both Stop the jerky.
Oh, Squirly, do you have anything to plug while you're here, mate? Thank you for joining again.
Nah, thanks.
For being Delby.
Yeah, it's good to be Delby with a working penis. If you like fishing, listen to the Chumming Up podcast. That's mate too. Other than that, I'm doing shows everywhere, Bunbury and stuff. Just look for where they are.
Cool. Very nice. I am on this Friday and Saturday night in Freo, down at Freo Comedy Lounge.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
At the Sailing for Oranges.
The what?
That's what the
Is that what
pub's
it's
called.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I did not know that.
We don't like fucking oranges.
So that's
Just boycott that.
Yeah, what the fuck, man?
it's a big thing for me to get a Friday and Saturday night spot for Comedy Lounge at the Freo room. So I'm very excited about that.
You'll be up on the wall soon.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Next to me.
Bloody oath. That'd be bloody good. I'm with Jurek. I think Xavier, Chris Pachulo. So it should be, really good, fun show. And even last night, mate, you did. I stayed. I left as you finished off, but I loved it. It was good. It was good fun last night at ECC because you could just.
Well, I got the message on the way back from training. Yeah. So, I mean, that was what my bit was about, not showering.
Yeah. It was bloody good. I had a bit of fun with Jace on stage, which I really enjoyed. So, Jace, well done hosting. And it was good fun last night. But just keep an eye out for any more shows that I'm doing because I'm really enjoying the comedy. So,
all right, I'm going to go have a steak.
Yeah, fuck yeah. But sick. That was an awesome episode. Thank you once again, and we'll definitely be getting you back on, old son. So
Sounds good, man.
Cheers.
Cheers, big horse.
Thank you.